Did you know that Trafalgar Law was first introduced during the Skypiea arc? It's absolutely insane, but if you look at the cover of chapter 257 and manage to rip your eyes past the ever magnificent Warpole, then in the background you can see a young Trafalgar Law. Hello and welcome to the Groundline Review, your source for everything One Piece. My name is Liam, but that kid's name is not Trafalgar Law. It's a crazy detail though, because this kid's design 6 years of real life time later would be used to garb our pre-time skip Trafalgar Law. Seriously, the child even looks like he has the goatee and everything. It is beyond wild. And One Piece is jam-packed full of details like this that most fans never notice, many of which are significantly more mind-blowing and relevant. And if you've not read the 1000 plus chapters or watched the 1000 plus episodes many multiples of times, then you are going to miss these finer points. But that's why you have me, the guy who does the things. But we are going to start with a big, small detail though. And this one, when I heard it, it's one of those things that just made me go, whoa. So, Fleet Admiral Sakazuki. You may know him as the man who killed Ace, threatened to kill Kobe, and who promptly soiled himself when confronted by Shanks. And most fans will probably know him better as Akainu, but that is just a sneaky epithet, and Sakazuki is his real name, which is very important because it's probably one of the most painfully well-chosen names in the series. Sakazuki is a surprisingly one kanji word, and it refers to the ritual exchange of sake cups, a very common Yakuza practice which can be done in one of two ways. One is an equal exchange to bring people together as siblings, whilst another would be to enter a master-servant style relationship, which is probably a lot less kinky than it sounds. A great example of the latter ritual would be the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, who initially pledged themselves to Luffy via a Sakazuki ritual. Meanwhile, an example of the former would obviously be Luffy, Ace, and Sabo, who became brothers via Sakazuki. And this is where things get super twisted now, because not only did they become brothers by Sakazuki, but their brotherhood was also severed by a Sakazuki. Luffy's brother was taken away by a man representing the very thing that had brought them together. And it gets worse, like a lot worse, because when we think about Sabo's amnesia, all of a sudden this makes a lot of sense. The way this event is portrayed in the series is Sabo hearing Ace's death and things just, sort of clicking. That's not it though. It is so much more sinister, because Sabo doesn't just read about the death of Ace, he also reads that Ace was killed by Sakazuki whilst protecting Luffy. So in one news article, Sabo sees these three words: Ace, Luffy, Sakazuki. Bam! All of a sudden, Sabo remembers the brotherhood he forged, just in time to watch it crumble apart before his very eyes. And I know I say this a lot, but this legitimately mind blew me, because it means that Oda named Sakazuki pretty much exclusively for the purpose of Sabo. An entire Marine Admiral named just to build the story of a character that we had no idea even existed until after the events of Marineford. And in many ways, his name should probably be Anti-Sakazuki. So now what we need to see is Sabo killing Anti-Sakazuki, which would make him an anti-Sakazuki, thus restoring the original Sakazuki, and Ace, well, Ace would still be dead, but it might be a nice thing to do anyway, However, not all subtle details are meticulously planned, or in fact, planned at all. And this next one is a great example of something that just went impossibly right. So there is a particular soundtrack in One Piece, which I can't play for you for annoying copyright reasons, but you have definitely heard it before. It's the soft piano track that plays whenever something super sad happens in the anime. It goes something like this. Da, 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 dun, dun, dun. I don't know. I can't do it. It does sound something like that. I can't do it. I am not a music. But for example, it's the extremely sad song that plays over Whitebeard's final moments during the Paramount War, where he's thinking about his crew and his dreams of having a family, and it's so emotional. The song itself doesn't necessarily matter though. What matters is the title. And are you ready for this? Because the title of that track is called Gold and Odin. And this is something that is too perfect to overlook. In this modern day, you cannot put those two words together without referencing Goldie Roger and Kozuki Odin. But the wild thing is that this song existed long before we were introduced to Odin. And in fact, it existed long before it was used to underscore Whitebeard's death. And you know what? It even existed before we met Tony Chopper. Because Gold and Odin was composed for the very first One Piece movie, which was released in the year 2000. And it was named Gold and Odin because because the main villain of that film, El Dorado, had a gold obsession, and the emotional center of the film was about a young boy and his grandfather who owned a floating Odin shop, hence gold and Odin. However, 21 years later, this track is still being used in the anime, and the title, by sheer cosmic coincidence, now appears to reference the relationship between two of the most important characters who have ever lived in the story. This is just one of those real-life events that's crazier than any fiction could be, although maybe not quite as crazy as El Dorado's unreasonably high shorts in the film. I mean, come on, those shorts are higher than Smoker on April 20th. For something sneakier and a bit more intentional now, did you know that One Piece exists within One Piece? Which is a very Inception style statement to make, but that's exactly what it is. During the beginning of the Little Garden arc, Nami searches frantically for a book, because there's this nice little quaint library aboard the Going Merry, and within that library is a book labeled One Piece. How about that? And not only that, but right next to it is another book labeled Echiro Oda, which assumedly is a biography of the author of One Piece. So we have something of a conspiracy on our hands here, because one of the Straw Hats is a literal One Piece fan, and my money is on Usopp. It just explains so much. Usopp read One Piece, and that's why all of his lies keep coming true, because he knows what's going to happen. And just a disclaimer before people inevitably take me seriously. I don't know why anyone takes me seriously. I don't actually believe this, so this is just a fun thing that exists. It's irrelevant, like most of the things that I talk about. As does shipping. I mean, it's more or less fun, depending on who you are. I'm not the biggest fan of it myself. However, there was a rather infamous occasion of a quote-unquote official ship crafted by Oda. So here we have a sketch of Luffy holding a suspiciously Nami-looking baby. And this pops up every now and then in the fandom as evidence of Oda's approval of the Luffy-Nami pairing. However, in this thing that we call reality, this was drawn as a tribute to Oda's editor at the time, Takuhiro Habuta, who had just produced a daughter spawn. Although, and this is just my speculation, but I suspect that it was Habuta's wife who actually gave birth to the child. Now, speaking of giving birth, and well, I think I've picked a pretty tricky transition line there, haven't I? Speaking of giving birth, did you know that the name on Sanji's birth certificate is actually listed as Stupid Cook? Because that's what Zoro thinks. And here's something that often goes quite under the radar, but Zoro has never once referred to Sanji by his actual name. Meanwhile, the inverse is not true. Sanji usually refers to Zoro as some sort of Marimo or shitty swordsman. However, there are definitely cases where Sanji has used Zoro's name. And we know this courtesy of a reader who painstakingly went through the series and added up the amount of times that Zoro and Sanji have referred to each other. And as of volume 73, Sanji has apparently used Zoro's name a pretty incredible 14 times, while Zoro has used Sanji's name 14 times less than that. However, some controversy now, because this is not consistent between translations. In the Viz manga edition, there exists a special editor's note claiming that in their English version, Zoro has used Sanji's name for the sake of context. So how very scandalous there. Weirdly enough, in the anime though, Zoro does use Sanji's name a handful of times for, I don't know, reasons. And I have to say that it's just weird listening to Zoro's Japanese voice uttering those syllables, so please make it stop. But continuing with the naming topic, here's a slightly depressing one, but have you ever stopped and considered Baby 5? One Piece is full of weird names, but this one is particularly off, and potentially very tragic as well, because as we know, she was abandoned by her mother, who repeatedly labeled her as being useless, hence the whole being useful complex. Legitimately one of the darkest backstories in One Piece that we always overlook for some reason. But one train of thought goes a shade darker than this and proposes that Baby 5's mother was so uncaring about her children that she didn't even bother to give them names. So the first child was simply Baby 1, the second Baby 2, and so on until Baby 5, and potentially even into the future with Babies 6, 7, and 8. Maybe even more depending on how frequently this mother reproduced her allegedly useless children. Now I should say that apparently Baby 5 did reveal her actual name as a child to Law and Buffalo, but this doesn't take away from that thought, because it could simply mean that she has a family name and then her first name is Baby 5. Sort of like how Trafalgar Law's real name is Trafalgar Law, just with some water and a big old D in the middle, which to me sounds like the world's worst cup of tea. Here's a question for you though. If I asked you to tell me which character has appeared on the most volume covers of One Piece, you'd probably say Luffy, yeah? And for good reason, because you would be right. Good on you. Who's a clever viewer? It's you. But what if I was to ask which character has appeared on the second most amount of volume covers? Your mind brain would probably wander through all sorts of possibilities like say Zoro, Zami, or even maybe Zonji. But all of those are wrong on several levels, because the character who has appeared on the second most amount of volume covers is actually Panda Man. Man. This sneaky dude guy is absolutely everywhere. But the trick is, and you would never notice this on the English volumes because their covers are like this nice thick piece of cardboard, whereas in Japanese, all of the volumes come with dust covers. And if you look underneath these covers, well, you generally find a nice fun panda surprise. And the Panda Man lore in the series, which is generally played out in secret on volume covers, runs so much deeper than you could ever imagine. Through these covers, we have learned that Panda Man has several enemies pursuing him throughout the world, such as the debt collector Tomato Gang, as well as Panda Man's ultimate rival, Unforgivable Mask. And within this lore also exists a love interest being Panda Woman, although it is currently unknown if she holds mutual feelings. And furthermore, are pandas, are they even capable of love? Well, according to research, no, they are not. Apparently, pandas are very solitary and selfish creatures that don't construct any meaningful relationships at all, very much assuming the sociopath role within the animal kingdom. They come together to mate and then they discard one another. So in many ways, pandas are quite similar to Big Mom. They exist purely as babby production factories, and once your usefulness to them has expired, you will end up as a turnip in the ground. However, back to something moderately more relevant. Very excitingly, we have recently confirmed that Panda Man is in fact a mink, because on the cover of volume 98, you can actually see him in his glorious Sulong form. Also, for whatever reason, an integral aspect of the Panda Man lore involves this creature, which we've actually seen in the canon of the series, because this is a long bear, which we encountered on Long Ring Longland. But a lot of people know about the Panda Man sightings in the series or even the volume covers, but here is the true secret. Now, what people seriously neglect is the back of the volume covers, because you probably can't see this on camera. I can confirm. Can't see, crap, but this is where the bulk of the Panda Man story plays out. Such as the back of volume 54, where it is revealed that Panda Man may or may not have been abducted by aliens. Aliens do exist in One Piece, by the way, like lots of aliens, but that is a topic for another time. Meanwhile, here's a topic for right now, because there's always more to learn, explore, and experience with this wonderful series, so I look forward to seeing you there. Big news about Big Admirals, also Big Rotund Sentomaru's fearsome backstory, and one big detail that you missed in this chapter. Big things, ever so many big things, and none of them come to us through actual One Piece, which is why these videos are mandatory for your fictional pirate learning. So we've got some good old justice, with Oda revealing in the SBS of volume 106 what the respective justices are of Admirals Fujitora and Greenbull. Fujitora subscribes to either humane justice or honorable justice. There's a bit of a translation dispute right now, because different people interpret it, well, differently. But either way fits for Fujitora. Of all of the admirals, he's the one governed most by the principle of doing the right thing for the people. You know, the job that the world government pretends it's doing. When it comes to Greenbull, though, he is a much more interesting case, because a couple of people familiar with Japanese culture did predict this, but his justice is either deadly/determined justice, but it has also been translated as suicidal justice, and not without very good reason. Observe, upon his man chest, Greenbull has a very prominent tattoo which says Shinkawa Shinju. Now, to us uncultured swine, that's just assorted weeb noises, but stick with me here for a bit because this is a wild rabbit hole. Shinkawa Shinju literally means double suicide at the River of Death, and the tattoo is almost certainly a play on a song sung by Yoshio Harada, the real-life performer who Greenbull's design is based on. However, the actual song's name is Shinjuku Shinju, meaning double suicide at Shinjuku, a Japanese city quite close to Tokyo. Now, in the SBS itself, Oda goes on to comment. He says that, mate, that Greenbull must have quite a sad past due to that there tattoo, because the tattoo doesn't just have a double meaning. No, it's much more likely to hold a triple meaning. There's a very famous Rakugo play called Shinagawa Shinju, and you can probably guess what it means by now, but just in case, it translates to double suicide at Shinagawa. The tragic story for which goes as follows. It's about an old prostitute with money problems who wishes to commit suicide and convinces a young man to do so with her by jumping off a bridge. However, at the last moment, the man changes his mind, but she pushes him off anyway. And then, right before she jumps herself, a messenger arrives, informing her that money has arrived. She is delighted, and the idea of killing herself now seems completely ridiculous, so she casually returns to her daily life. So it's implied that Greenbull has had quite a tragic past, or is going to have quite a tragic future. Potentially both. Both is possible. The reason why the Rakugo play is a likely explanation, though, is because Oda is obviously aware and using it for inspiration elsewhere in the story. In fact, during Wano, a character named Osome appears. She's the geisha with the adorable pet mouse that Sanji saves during his fight with Queen. But Osome is also the name theme of the woman in Shinagawa Shinju. With all of this in mind though, you can see how Green Bull would have been the worst possible admiral to defend Marijois, because his philosophy on justice is heavily grounded in emotion, and he seems to be much more suitable for leading attacks, although that didn't work out for him too well on Wano either. Oda also confirms that Green Bull doesn't need to eat. He uses photosynthesis because he is a plant man. Next up, we have the long-awaited backstory of Sentomaru, long-awaited by someone, somewhere I'm sure. Essentially though, a certain island was having trouble with wild bears. The Marines then tapped Vegapunk to concoct and install some sort of anti-bear system, for which I imagine that the island would have had to pay some sort of bear tax to upkeep, but also on this island was a young Sentomaru, who the Marines found and was powerful enough to defeat all of the bears, having installed himself as boss of the mountain. Now, as a young Sentomaru-ling, he had been abandoned by the village because he was too violent, and so Vegapunk, intrigued by his strength, then hired Sentomaru to become his bodyguard. In a way, it's quite similar to the backstory of Big Mom. She was abandoned because her power was too destructive to manage, and it shows the difference between mentor intentions. Big Mom grew up to be a twisted figure after having undergone the twisted mentorship of Carmel and Streusen, whereas Sentomaru became a relatively more well-adjusted gent under the generally good guyishness of Vegapunk. To be fair, I imagine that Sentomaru's power was much more manageable as well, and if he'd had the demon living inside him that Big Mom did, then I wonder what would have happened. I also often wonder what would have happened if Big Mom did have a legitimately kind-hearted mentor. Was she always doomed to be consumed by her own power? Or is there a world where Charlotte Lin Lin really could have grown up to become a Marine Admiral or something? But something much more important now, because we finally have a good and bad timeline future for Brook. And as it happens, absolutely nothing changes Brook between time and universes. Brook always remains exactly the same, which I think is amazing, because every other character ends up with a downright evil or pathetic version of themselves in the bad timeline. Then again, there's a very bittersweet idea here as well, which is that, of course, Brook is the same because he's already living in the bad timeline. He lost his best friends in the world, the Rumbar Pirates. And if not for his devil fruit, he would have had just as tragic a life as any of the bad timeline Straw Hats. So I guess that losing the Rumbar Pirates is just Brook's canon event across every alternate universe, but it's cool to know that Brook is a multiversal consistent. No matter what happens, Brook will always be Brook. The afro is also consistent. A lot of the bad timeline Straw Hats lose their hair, but Brook, he does not. It's very, very firmly rooted. Here's a cute detail. In chapter 1061, if you look very carefully at the establishing shot of the G14 base, you can see some balloons flying rather festively, perhaps too festively for such serious business Marines. This was noticed by many, and so the question was posed to Oda, to which he replied, yes, they're balloons. The G14 branch is close to Egghead, so the children who were victims of what happened in the Punk Hazard arc are staying at the base for medicines after being checked by Vegapunk. A Marine base is a rough place, so in order to make the children feel safer, if just a little, Vice Admiral Dole gave an order to attach some balloons. And in case you don't remember, Dole is the Vice Admiral we saw in command of the base, and her personality at the time was quite difficult to determine. She really could have gone either way. She could have gone to moral justice or absolute justice, but it looks like the former. And Dole is the kind of Marine that directly counters Nami. In case you didn't know, Nami actually has a Sanji-esque weakness, but specifically to kind female Marines, and it's because they remind her of Belmer. And Tate, that might end up being relevant because Dole is part of a legion of ships on their way to Egghead Island as we speak. We have some developments regarding main character in waiting Trafalgar Law. Oda has revealed some details about his awakening, such as the K in K room standing for sword. But Internet Man, sword does not begin with a K, nor does it ever involve itself in the business of the letter K. Well, in Japanese, it does. Sword is katana, and katana has a K, more specifically a ka, because there is no single, or as I like to call it, a special K in Japanese. But in English, it's also been translated as knife room, which is quite befitting of a surgeon. Basically though, Law is creating a room specifically for his sword, which is insane because it takes the sword out of phase with reality. It becomes sort of like Peronas Ghosts. They exist on a different plane, so you can't really defend against them. Law's second awakening maneuver, R-room, stands for remote room, which simply means a room constructed without Law inside of it. I mean, I guess the K room also did that technically, but this is a more classical spherical room, which is significantly more powerful because in these rooms, Law is God. As far as we know, there are no limits to what he could do in these rooms. So if he constructs a remote room, he can set whatever rules he likes without needing to follow them himself. It's so stupidly powerful because even the simplest of rules can be devastating. I mean, Big Mom was beaten almost purely on the principle that she couldn't be heard because the rule of the room was silence. So what's to stop Law law doing something like making his rooms devoid of oxygen, or even setting a rule that everyone in the room has to continuously shit their pants. There is nothing stopping this except for Law's imagination and willpower. If Luffy had this fruit, then One Piece would be an even more wild series than it already is, which is already pretty wild, as Oda has also drawn an anthropomorphized version of Law's sword Kikoku. Apparently, Kikoku is a weary explorer in need of a place to settle down. And Oda also drew Katakuri's Mogura trident, which I love because it's just a giant mole, but not just any giant mole, a king giant mole, because the trident end looks like a delightful little crown. I miss Katakuri. But here's a slightly controversial revelation though. In the SBS, a question is asked about how S-Nick uses the Meromeronomy. This is because Boa Hancock generally takes advantage of lust, so S-Nick, being able to petrify people, calls the affected characters into question. Oda confirms that the fruit is designed to take instinctual advantage of the emotions felt by the observer. Any emotion, not necessarily lust. And in S-Nick's case, it would be a general overwhelming sense of cuteness, which means that this fruit is ridiculous. It might actually be one of the most powerful fruits in the series, and no wonder why Blackbeard was after it. It's important to note that the questioner specifically asked if being petrified by S-Snake would make people think that he was a lolicon, so Oda responded to that directly. The way this power works is that it brings out your instinctual feelings, whether that's beauty or adorableness, in the same way that we would all find a baby or little kid adorable, right? Regardless of the emotion, you end up petrified. Even if someone who was petrified also happened to be a lolicon, you can't really judge that it was those emotions that petrified them. Because of that, you won't get ousted for the lolicon you are, so get petrified already. Which I bring up because there was a rough translation on Twitter that made it look like bringing the whole lolicon aspect up was Oda's agenda. Although to be fair, he did pick this question to answer. And I don't know, it's always a really unpleasant topic to get into from a Western perspective, because I get that it's a joke, and I get that there's a bit of a cultural divide here, and I also get that we are speaking purely about fictional characters. However, with all of that in mind, I just think that from my perspective, it's not a great thing to joke about regardless, considering the weirdly high proportion of mangaka specifically that have been arrested for the possession of child-related material, including Oda's very own mentor. But it's one of those things where I'm like, yeah, alright, just let Japan be Japan. It's not my business, and I'm not going to achieve anything judging them all the way from Australia. But more importantly, the main takeaway from here is that the Meromeronomy is one of the most powerful fruits in the series because it operates on any feeling. As long as you can generate an extreme response, it is a one-hit KO. And I suppose the worst person this fruit could go to is like your run-of-the-mill standard person. Someone completely neutral who, when their parents were conceiving, selected all middle ciders in the child creation menu. And someone who goes out of their way to not have strong opinions in public. That is the only way you could be anything less than a godly user of this fruit. Oda also confirms that all CP9 members were promoted to CP0, as most of us assumed. However, Oda stresses that only Lucci and Kaku became part of the elite CP0 squad, which is the agents who wear masks. I really wish Oda answered how and why they were promoted though, because they left their cover stories as world government enemies for their failure on Enisobi, but then they showed up not only employed but promoted. And I just want to know what happened to get them back and or who made that decision. Alright, big question now. Between Shanks and Beckman, who's more popular with girls? To which Oda replies, Shanks is probably more popular, but Beckman flirts more. After all, Beckman loves women. Yeah, makes sense. Because to me, Shanks is like a combination of Luffy and Zoro. Sort of like what would happen if Luffy used a sword and took up being a professional alcoholic. And Ben Beckman, well, he has very strong Sanji vibes, plus he just fits. He flirts more, but in the end, the women tend to flock to the captain, and also sometimes Zoro, like with Hiyori, but never Sanji. It may be Pudding, but even then Sanji doesn't remember it, so it may as well not have happened. Jinbe has a secret. About a month has passed since the end of Whole Cake Island and the beginning of the raid on Onigashima, and whilst we all took our seats in the audience to witness the gloriousome performance that was Acts 1 and 2 of Wano, Mr. Jinbe has been busy backstage setting up something big. His absence was purposeful, meaningful, and various other synonyms. What are you hiding, Jinbe? Is it under that rock? Let me see it. Jinbe? No, bad shark. Bad. Alright, I guess we're gonna have to do this the hard way. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece. My name is Liam, and here's a secret. I unironically like St. Charlos as a character. because he does exactly what he's meant to do, which is be an insufferable pigman with a face that looks like a testicle just commencing puberty. And then you get to see him get smacked repeatedly. He's great. Someone who appreciates Charles a lot less, though, is Jinbe, a sharkman who has legitimately had more impact on the series off-screen than he has on-screen. He's kind of like a secret agent of the One Piece world, even assigned with the codename 00 Melon, primarily due to his rounded shark meat physique. But Jinbe was asked to join the Straw Hats twice, and on both occasions he offered Luffy a formal resignation stating, "Dear Luffy-kun, I'd like to thank you very much for offering me the position of helmsman within the Straw Hat Pirates. However, after much consideration, I've decided to go swimming instead. YOLO swag, Jinbe." At least that's what he told us. Because on both of these occasions, Jinbe has been putting in some serious work behind the scenes. And between Whole Cake Island and the raid on Onigashima, something pretty huge happened that, just like the meat and cheese of a kebab, is being kept under wraps. Also, here's a portrait of my dog staring at you and questioning your life's choices. And if you'd like to stop him judging you, then all you need to do is subscribe to the Grand Line Review, which will also result in consistent injections of One Piece culture being administered directly into your YouTube feed. Don't forget to say hi in the comments if you're new to the Grand Fleet, welcome. But also throughout this video, we will be furnishing Jinbe's new room aboard the Thousand Sunny. We will be doing this with your decor suggestions, the first of which being, he should have a pineapple bed. Yep, seems legit. And I can't wait to see this fully furnished room. So before we examine Jinbes Secret, I first need to make something quite clear. When it comes to storytelling, there are different perspectives to examine. One is the in-world events, what the characters say and do, and the other is the stagecraft of the author. Think of it like a theater. Whilst actors are performing and doing actorly stuff on stage, the crew are preparing for the next scene backstage. And in this case, Jinbe has spent most of the show that is One Piece as part of the backstage crew. The reason why he can't be on stage is because he has something very important to set up for the next scene. For example, his first absence occurred after Fishman Island, and the onstage reasoning for why he wasn't able to join the Straw Hats was because he had unfinished business, which we would come to learn was his duty to Big Mom and stuffing her face with this weird anthropomorphic crockenbush. However, his offstage reasoning was slightly more complex. Whilst on stage, the Dressrosa saga played out to great applause and I guess some boos if you were watching it weekly, but backstage, Jinbe was preparing all sorts of props for Whole Cake Island. He had to find a poneglyph, he had to recruit Wadatsumi, who would prove integral to the climax of Whole Cake Island, and he even had to preset Karabo for his involvement in Wano. All of which we learned through Jinbe's cover story. And just speaking of Wadatsumi, during the cover story, he was posing as an entity known as the Sea God, which I just thought I'd bring up because it's interesting. And the concept of gods in One Piece has become, well, rather unexpectedly important. But Jinbe's first absence did far more for both the story and his character than joining the Straw Hats right then and there ever could. For one thing, it emphasized how seriously he takes the concept of duty, but also it set him up to be a pretty incredibly important piece in Whole Cake Island. During that arc, Jinbe was the inside man, because he had complete trust within Totland and he was able to accomplish all sorts of tasks like saving Luffy from one of his many series imprisonments, as well as setting up the alliance between the Straw Hat Pirates and the Fire Tank Pirates, all of which are essential story functions that required him to spend a lot of time backstage. So Jinbe's initial rejection of joining the crew after Fishman Island had a lot less to do with his in-world reasons and much more to do with the technical functions of how Oda needed to structure his story. Another way of thinking about this is casting our minds back to soap operas or sitcoms. A lot of the time when characters are killed or, sent away, it's because of production reasons. It's not because that's where the story was naturally leading, but more because the actor just doesn't want to play the character anymore or the writers are sick of the character or something along those lines. But in stories that are significantly more well-planned, like say One Piece, which is a good example because that's the thing we talk about on this channel, but in stories like that, the production needs work in harmony with the narrative requirements. Jinbe went backstage after Fishman Island because Oda needed him to, and that paid off spectacularly. But why did he disappear again after Whole Cake Island? What was he setting up backstage that prevented him from joining the crew right then and there? While not having a fully furnished room would be one potential concern, so let's continue designing Jinbe's aquarium with an iron and ironing board to keep his vast number of kimonos free of creases and wrinkles. Also, I imagine a few of you at this stage will no doubtedly be thinking, why are we doing this, Mr. Internet Man? The Thousand Sunny already has an aquarium, he can just sleep there. But that is for storing fish to eat and Jinbe is friend, not food. Meanwhile, back in world, the reason why Jinbe stayed behind was that he simply couldn't abandon his dude guys because of honor and bonds and stuff, and yeah, sure, it's a fine enough excuse, but Oda could have just as easily written it in the opposite direction, where the most honorable thing to do is to put trust in the Sun Pirates to do their job and survive, much like how Luffy places his complete trust in his own crew. When a Straw Hat says, "Go on ahead, Captain Dude, I got this," Luffy doesn't then go, "Oh mate, I don't know, this seems kinda dangerous, I should probably stay as well." The point is that Jinbe didn't stay behind because that was the only solution to the scenario. He stayed behind because Oda either needed him to accomplish a task before appearing on Wano, or that Jinbe's early presence on Wano would have hindered an essential plot point. For an example of the latter, the way the Whole Cake Island crew initially arrive on Wano is through a whirlpool that separates them, which very conveniently places Luffy on his own. However, if Jinbe had been there with them, then he logically would have saved each and every one of them, and they would have started Wano together as some sort of fishy family. That's one example where an author may need to keep a character absent. For another classic example of this, we can turn to Star Trek: The Next Generation, which featured a character who could quite literally read minds. However, she was always very conveniently absent when the plot needed a character to lie. But I don't think that was quite the case with Jinbe, because other than the beginning of Wano, his presence on the island, it really wouldn't have changed all that much about Acts 1 and 2 of Wano. And even with the whirlpool example, Oda could have easily written it in a way where Jinbe was able to save everyone but Luffy, who fell just out of grasp at the last second. So I'm very much forced to conclude that Jinbe was, once again, removed from the story so that he could do some backstage setup that we are not currently privy to. All we know is when he shows up on stage again. And let's just linger on that for a bit, because Jinbe's reappearance is, it's one of the most ridiculous moments in all of One Piece. He comes back in chapter 796 with a heroic entrance at the exact perfect time to join the raid. Just a couple of questions though. How did he know when and where the raid was taking place? And in fact, how did he even know that there was going to be a raid? Let's add what to the when and where. None of the Whole Cake Island crew knew about the raid plan before they arrived on Wano. And even the Fart Samurai architect of said plan didn't know which port the Allied forces were supposed to be meeting at. So I can accept that Jinbe knows how to get to Wano. He is a very wise and seasoned sushi after all. And I guess if worse came to worse, he could just probably ask local fish for directions. But how did he know the exact time and place he needed to be to join a raid that he didn't know existed? Because right now the answer is that he coincidentally arrived at this exact time in this exact spot, and there is not a word in the English language for how ridiculously serendipitous this is. It's one of those moments where you really can't do too much critical thinking because, you know, it ruins the fun story. Much like Jinbe's feng shui, if we don't get this room up and running with another design choice being a poster of Fishman Nami. And I really don't want to know what he does with that. What I want to know is the reason behind his currently flimsy story. And to pose a great contrasting narrative, have you heard of pineapples? Because Marco the Phoenix has more or less the same story, except in this analogy, Jinbe is unemployed, and Marco is a lucrative small business owner because only one of them makes sense. Marco was late to the raid because he was doing stuff on the Sphinx Island, but also because he spent time looking for Izo. Meanwhile, Marco knew exactly where and when to show up because Nekomamushi was with him, who knew the general raid plan. And once they arrived on Wano, they immediately contacted the other vassals to organize a place to meet. That place being the big F-off Skull in the Sea, because as far as landmarks go, that's a pretty noticeable one. Compare that to Jinbe, who arrived on his own, was late for no good reason, didn't even know about the raid, but who still managed to show up at an even more perfect time and place than Marco's team. And with that in mind, I suppose Jinbe's favorite song is Kesh's TikTok, because apparently the party don't start till he walks in. But much like seafood in general, I just don't buy it. Especially when you look at Jinbe's excuse. He states that he was late because he was tending to the wounded sun pirates, and then, and I quote, having a big send-off. Basically, Jinbe was late to Wano because he was too busy partying, which is very irresponsible of a man who's quite typically not that, particularly when you consider the time involved. I've said that from the end of Whole Cake Island to the beginning of the raid is roughly a month of in-world time, which we know because both of those evenings contain a full moon, so we can use the fun fictional lunar cycle. So Jinbe really took his time getting to Wano. When in-world, what he really should have done was made sure that all of his crew were alive and recovering, and then swim his well-rounded fish butt straight to Wano as quickly as possible. Who knows, maybe he got a bit too high on the old seaweed during that party and just lost track of time. But even though Jinbe didn't know about the raid, he certainly knew that his new crew were fighting an old emperor, and that he probably doesn't have the luxury of taking his sweet time. As it's presented to us, it's not great writing in my opinion, which is why I give Oda the benefit of the doubt here. To implement something this kind of clunky in what is usually a very tight series, there must have been a backstage purpose for Jinbe's absence. But as for Jinbe's private space, our next next set design element is a fork. Simple and effective. It certainly is a conversation starter. Like, dude, what's with the fork? And I don't know, however regular people talk to each other. To put this bizarre arrival into context though, the week where Jinbe showed up again in the manga, the online community was rather appropriately flooded with conspiracy theories. And one was that this Jinbe was actually a drawing made by Kanjuro. And even though Kanjuro had never met Jinbe before and thus probably wouldn't be able to draw him, this idea was seen as almost as reasonable as this shark just popping up again out of nowhere. Another intriguing idea was that Jinbe is actually lying. He wasn't late due to wound tending and hardcore partying, but he was actually delayed due to the Sun Pirates being killed in the battle against Big Mom. And so Jinbe spent his time grieving before he was finally ready to join Luffy. I don't think that one's too likely though, because yeah, it's super dark and depressing and just not quite in line with what One Piece tends to be. So I think it's far more likely that, similarly to his cover story, Jinbe met someone or found something on his particular journey that Oda would not have been able to implement by just having him escape aboard the Sunny. And this may not necessarily be something that pays off during Wano. He may have been absent during most of Wano in order to set up for the next saga. Perhaps he found a clue to the final road poneglyph that his home island used to hold. Maybe he ran into the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. Potentially he was halted by some sort of red-headed shanks? Or could Jinbe have had some kind of interaction with the Germa that will only pay off in the future? And who knows, is Caesar Clown involved? I hope not, but maybe. The options are about as endless as the sea itself, by which I mean clearly limited, but not in a way that our minds can easily quantify. Much like the missing centerpiece of Jinbe's aquarium, because he needs a small liquor cabinet, handmade from artful driftwood pieces. Jinbe's Jinbe, which I imagine is also adorned with many emergency Sakazuki, by which I mean both the cups and the head of Sakazuki himself. Oda has just revealed one of the most important One Piece characters we've never met, a certain mystery woman with deep connections to a certain man. He's also detailed the global conspiracy to overthrow the world government involving CP9, as well as the, frankly, embarrassing secret of St. Marcus Mars, the reason why Fujitora is even more powerful than we thought, a startling fact about one Golden Lion Shiki, a less than startling fact about butts in general, and most shockingly, this is the former Warlord of the Sea who was defeated by Port Castiace before One Piece began. And he has a big connection to an even bigger Emperor of the Sea. All of this comes from the SBS of volume 109, and this is an unusually stacked volume. I always say that the SBS segment's pretty much mandatory reading because they contain so much information that really should be in the manga, and that has never been more true than it is today. So the following comes to us courtesy of Arta from the Library of Ohara, as well as Pewpiece and the Will of Marco on Twitter, who graciously translated all of the it. And we're going to begin with our brand new old Warlord of the Sea. So, according to Eiichiro Oda, this is Hanafuda. He has a hobby collecting Zoan-type devil fruits, particularly ancient models, and it is said that he was planning something, but we don't know what became of him. His height is 5.14 meters, and he was known as the, quote, king of lizards. So Hanafuda was almost certainly an ancient Zoan user, and with the epithet king of the lizards, I reckon that he had a Tyrannosaurus rex fruit. Rex being Latin for king, which I know because my mother forced me to go to a private school that taught Latin, and as a result, I get called elitist by people who could learn that very same thing by reading the second line of Wikipedia. But we should definitely address the elephant in the room. So Jack, could you please get out of the room? I don't even know how you got in here. Okay, now that he's gone, we should say that there is a definite Kaido connection here. Hanafuda's goal of collecting Zoan fruits, specifically ancient Zoan fruits, aligns with Kaido's desires pretty perfectly, and it gives us two possibilities. The first is that Hanafuda was a rival of Kaido, kind of like Gecko Moria was, except Hanafuda was in an arms race to gather as many Zoans as he could to eventually become capable of opening a far more popular zoo than Kaido ever could. But I actually think it's much more likely that Hanafuda was working for Kaido. He had infiltrated the Seven Warlords on Kaido's behalf, which there is some precedent for. Doflamingo didn't infiltrate the Warlords for Kaido, and he did have his own ambitions, but he was primarily working directly for Kaido to produce the Smile Fruit and such, which fit perfectly into the Beast Pirates naming scheme, as Doflamingo's alias was Joker. And you may or may not have noticed that most of Kaido's crew are named after playing cards like King, Queen, and Jack. And almost all of the lower ranking members are named after actual card games like Gin Rummy, Solitaire, Speed, Poker, etc. And Hanafuda also fits into this naming scheme, because Hanafuda are a type of playing cards. The same type of cards that were Nintendo's first ever, slightly illegal product back in the 1800s. And so Hanafuda could be the guy responsible for why most of the Toby Roppo have ancient Zoan devil fruits, especially characters like Ulti in page 1 who were taken in by Kaido as children, with of course the exception of Diaz Drake, who acquired his Allosaurus fruit all on his own and used that as a bit of a handy in for the Beast Pirates, because that's the first question Kaido asks whenever someone wants to join his crew. Alright, drop your pants and show us your dinosaur. This also makes me ask the question of which warlord replaced Hanafuda. The ones that predate him are Boa Hancock, who is the longest known serving warlord, having acquired the position 13 years ago. Although we know that Gecko Moria was already a warlord 12 years ago, then Jinbe joined 11 years ago, and Doflamingo blackmailed his way into the system 10 years ago. So we're looking at Crocodile, Mihawk, and Kuma. And it's definitely Kuma who replaced him, because Ace defeated Hanafuda 4 years ago. And 4 years ago also happened to be when Kuma agreed to become a warlord in exchange for Bonnie's treatment. So in a weird way, I guess that Kuma and Bonnie can thank Ace for that opportunity. I mean, Bonnie can't at the moment, but I'm sure that Kuma will be seeing Ace very soon if he hasn't already. Although going through the history of when everyone joined the warlords, it seems highly likely that there were probably around at least 4 or 5 others that we don't even know about. Ones that have had to be periodically replaced year after year. And that might be why Fujitora was ever so fed up with the system. It wasn't just Crocodile, Doflamingo, and Blackbeard, but historically this whole system has been nothing but one failure after another. Speaking of Fujitora, we have some massive throbbing news for him as well. Or more accurately, we have some news about his sword. It now has a name. It's called the Yakuza Kasin, which means Yakuza firing line, and is almost certainly named after the film Shinheitai Yakuza Kasin, which starred Shintaro Katsu, the Japanese actor who Fujitora's design was inspired by. And this I did not expect, but it is one of the supreme grade Meito blades, meaning that it carries the same rank as Mihawk's Yoru, Whitebeard's Naginata, the Shodai Kitetsu, and Roger's Ace. There's only 12 supreme grade blades in the world, and now we know 5 of them, and also we know who made Fujitora's sword. It was Fugetsu Kisaburo, who is not the person you're seeing on screen, no. This is Fugetsu Omusubi, who you might remember spent some time with Yamato in a cave before going off to die fighting Kaido. And the Yakuza Kasen was made by Omusubi's ancestor, because all of the greatest swords were made hundreds and hundreds of years ago. They literally do not make them the way they used to. But now for a colossal discovery regarding CP9. There's always been this big gap in their story between leaving the world government during their cover story, and then each and every one of them somehow becoming part of CP0 post-time skip. This is a story I've always wanted to know, and I never thought it would be anything huge, but mate, as it turns out, they were key figures in a global conspiracy to overthrow the world government. So this is their story as told by Oda. After CP9 lost at Enies Lobby, their cover story took place. CP9 was blamed for failing the Enies Lobby mission by Director Spandam, and they all disappeared somewhere. This was the beginning of their training to become even stronger. Just as a side note, something I love about CP9 is that they are incredibly rare villains who were not broken by Luffy and the Straw Hats, despite the fact that their defeat at Enies Lobby was more humiliating than publicly admitting that you liked anime in the early 2000s. But CP9, they took that and they said, you know what, kings and one queen, we were the problem. We were too weak, and we're gonna fix that. Which is why when Rob Lucci returned during Egghead Island, it was astounding that he was exactly the same because Luffy had failed to break his leopard will. It's pretty damn impressive, unlike Spandam, who simply continued to succeed via nepotism. And with that, let's continue the tale. Meanwhile, Spandam somehow rose to become the director of CP0 thanks to his father Spandine pulling the strings. But this is where Rob Lucci and the others discovered a new plot by the big wigs of the underworld and the former level 6 prisoners who were in league with Spandine and destroyed this organization to stop their infiltration plan. As a result of this incident, Lucci and the others returned to being intelligence agents as part of CP0. Spandine lost his authority and ended up on his sickbed, so Spandam ended up becoming Luffy's gopher boy. And what I love is that the Wikipedia page for gopher translates this for the non-American English speakers, and it translates it as a similar job to that of a peon in Commonwealth countries with a citation needed, which I think is a bit outdated. We don't employ many peons these days, which is a shame because the term applies brilliantly to Spandam. And look, there is a lot going on here. So firstly, Spandam's father Spandine was corrupt even by world government standards because he was working with the underworld, meaning the industries led by the underworld emperors, as well as former level 6 prisoners of Impel Down. And it seems like he was trying to place them within the world government to flood high-ranking positions with those loyal to him or loyal to the emperors. But this is just, it is beyond crazy because you got to think, what was the end game here? Was Spandine trying to maybe not overthrow the world government, but eventually eventually have a base strong enough that he could install himself as an Elder Star or something? Or was he just acting on behalf of the Underworld Emperors who were planning to commandeer the world government for themselves? Because they were going so far as to infiltrate CP0 by installing Spandam, so they were going right for the head of the world government. I have no idea what this mad lad was thinking, but this is the sort of event that I think needs to be told in some way. Like a novel, a spin-off manga, or a miniseries. Just something, because Spandine had the ambition of a true villain here, and he was doing it entirely through political and bureaucratic means. Which, probably not the most exciting story to tell in a shonen punch fighty manga, I get it. But instead of pacing the anime really slowly, I would want to see more stories like this. Have Toei adapt the stuff that we don't even get to see in any capacity. Like the backstory of Eustace Kid as well, and maybe even the family tree of Zoro. There is so much One Piece content that theoretically exists out there and can be taken advantage of that isn't. And we're not done with CP9 just yet, because we have news regarding Alpha, the nurse secret agent who appeared in Bonnie's flashback and who was defeated by a 10-year-old girl. Now Alpha looks exactly like Califa, and that's for good reason, because Oda has revealed that Alpha is the younger sister of Califa and another daughter of Lasky, one of the former CP9 agents who was present on Ohara during Buster Call Day, which would be the name of the National Day of Memorial observed on Ohara if anyone but Robin had survived it and remembered it. But this brings up the interesting dynamics of CP9. Most CP9 agents are orphans taken by the world government to their secret agent training island. And the reason for that is because it is so much easier to mold obedient killing machines when they have no emotional attachments to unnecessary things like, say, parents. But Lasky has been very attached to at least one woman, so much so that he created two spawn, and as is tradition with biological fathers in One Piece, dumped his own child onto someone else to raise, giving the world government two more nepotistic secret agents. Which makes me wonder if Califa and Alpha even know about each other, because they were raised entirely separately. Alpha was part of CP8, so she wasn't trained on the special CP9 island that Califa was. And just because we've had far too much actually relevant information in this SBS so far, Oda decided to include the following question for balance. Question: draw men's butts. Sorry, but please draw it, kneeling down. Please draw the butt of every male Straw Hat crew member, I beg you. To which Oda responded that he will not draw them because he's not interested in them. But this is a reference to one of Oda's side quests during Egghead Island, where he made a conscious decision to master the quote erotic art form of drawing female butts. Those are his words, not mine. And that's why none of the female characters are wearing pants at the moment on Egghead Island, because it would make the upskirt drawings much more difficult to pull off, and therefore much more difficult for Oda to pull off. Echiro Oda is a very open pervert, we all know it, let's not pretend. And to complement this, we also have another butt-focused question, this time involving very old men. One reader asked Echiro Oda why St. Marcus Mars is always standing when we see the five elders together. A very valid question, because there's plenty of seating available, especially around Topman Walkuri, but I suppose that might not be desirable, because I imagine that he smells a lot like the literal pig he is. The actual answer is even stupider than I could have predicted though, which is that Marcus Mars always forgets, and this is a direct quote, Marcus Mars always forgets his homework, so he is punished as a child would be by standing in the hallway. So that's the comically canonical reason why Marcus Mars is always standing. Because he is the laziest Elder Star, and once he clocks off for the day, he ain't doing shit. And I promise that we'll get back to the actually relevant stuff soon. There's one more big thing to say. But I have to flag this because this is one of the weirder things that I've ever seen in SBS, which is that someone has written in and left a Yelp-style review for the Egghead Island Vega Cola. It reads as follows: the moment you drink it, as the pungent feeling of ginger hits in, and the aroma of apples and lemons spread through your mouth, that word, and ginkgo leaf extract activate your brain so much that the ideas won't stop rushing out. Which is a pretty damn positive review. So this is a type of cola that enhances thinking, and may even be directly responsible for how the Vegapunks are always so full of ideas. The lesson here being that it's not about natural talent or hard work, it's all about which drugs you use as well as how and when you use them. Alright, so getting back to stuff that you should probably take a bit more note of, a reader asked the very common question about Golden Lion Shiki, and whether or not the events of One Piece Strong World are canon. And Oda replies that he doesn't worry about making the films canon. He could try and find a way to make them fit if he wanted, but then he would be worried about readers being obliged to see the films. Which is pretty big news because that means we'll probably never see a canon One Piece film put into production. So the next time something big happens, like say revealing that Shanks has a daughter, let's just remember that this is all fiction within an already fictional universe and maybe don't get too excited. But Oda then said something that piqued my interest, which is about Shiki's Devil Fruit. If you're unaware, Shiki is a canon character, and he was someone who Oda was going to use in the story before making him the main antagonist of Strong World. And here Oda says that that if Shiki wasn't used as a movie villain, then he never would have been given the Fuwa Fuwa no Mi, the float fruit. This is apparently because Oda has a rule not to include characters who can fly freely, because it breaks the premise of the world and the need for all of the sailing, which is why Oda set a hard limit on flying fruits during Alabasta by having Pell say that there are only 5 flying types known to exist. And this is a rule that Oda has abused even harder than Bartholomew Kuma, because we're now up to about 20 flying fruits at least. We're at the point where even characters like Batman can fly. His smile fruit powers sprout wings from his butt, and he is capable of that legendary power that Oda had reserved for only the goodest and rarest of boys. And then Oda confirms that Shiki's devil fruit is canon, but it's accidental canon. It was not the intention to make him a floaty man, but it's what we have now. And now for the big news, Oda has revealed a mystery woman after being asked the following question. Hello, Odachi-san. Granny Nyon said that the Empress from 2 generations ago died from falling madly in love, but the Empress from 2 generations ago was Shakuyaku. Why did Granny Nyon lie about this? So this is a mistake that I've made before. The history of the Kuja Empresses can be a bit confusing because we do know 3 of them. Boa Hancock, Shaki, and Elder Nyon, also known as Gloriosa, former member of the Rocks Pirates. But there is and has always been a 4th if you know how to read, which I haven't always. I had to learn. And so Oda starts his answer very appropriately. This is a matter of reading comprehension. It's not a lie. What she's referring to in this line, the Empress from 2 generations ago, was talking about the love sickness that she also got. In fact, in the past, the Empresses and warriors of this country have always died from this sickness without knowing the true reason. But in recent years, Granny Nyon and the others seem to have avoided death by going overseas. And Oda then introduces us to Toritoma, named after the Tritoma flower, who was the Empress of Amazon Lily immediately prior to Boa Hancock, and who unfortunately died of love sickness, the condition that Hancock was struck with after meeting Luffy. And so if you wanted to put all of the Empresses in a nice neat little line, and I do, you go Gloriosa, who abandoned Amazon Lily to join the Rocks Pirates after being hit with love sickness, after which point Shaki became Empress, and also eventually fled the Empire, likely due to love sickness inflicted by Silver's Rayleigh. Then Toritoma took up the mantle, and to her credit did not abandon the nation, but did end up losing her life. And then finally we have Boa Hancock, and well, you know her story. So the question now becomes, which notorious man is responsible for striking Toritoma with this sickness and in turn causing her death? And what I'm seeing online is, predictably, a lot of people jumping to Monkey D. Dragon because we have a rule, right? Whenever a new woman is introduced in One Piece, they're either immediately scouted for new crew member if they're young enough, or labeled Luffy's mother if they're old enough. I don't think that Toritoma is anyone's mother though, because remember, she died. So whatever life-saving love injection was required was not administered in this case. With that said, I would say it has to be a figure we know about. This wasn't just some guy. It takes something very special to infect a Kuja Empress. Someone whose name will be remembered by history. So maybe Toritoma fell for Shanks, but he was already in a committed entanglement with Makino. I use the word committed very loosely there because he's never actually with her. But Shanks, he's not a bad candidate, because Boa Hancock fell for the future Pirate King, Shaki fell for the first mate of the previous Pirate King, and Gloriosa fell for someone in the Rocks Pirates, which was also teased in this SBS. Oda has somewhat clarified that the man Gloriosa was pursuing was part of that crew, which narrows our choices down to Whitebeard, Rocks, and an odd contender, Kaido. And if you want to know why we can't dismiss Kaido, I've made a whole video about Gloriosa's bizarre love life, which you should absolutely check out next by clicking the thing here. Do I believe that ghosts exist in real life? No. This is a weird coincidence. But do I believe that ghosts exist in a fictional pirate-based manga? Oh yes. Yes, I do. And after this, so will you. Hello and welcome to the Ground Line Review, your source for everything One Piece. My name is Liam and my greatest fear is social interaction. If it comes down to a choice between that and the ghosts, then I will take the ghosts. But today, or I suppose tonight, we are here to examine the paranormal activity of the One Piece world. Because whilst the vast majority of phenomena in our pirate paradise can be brushed under the all-encompassing rug of fictional science, there is still an extraordinary amount of supernatural occurrences, including ghosts, spirits, and even demons. And fun fact, this was clearly supposed to be a Halloween video, but we didn't end up putting it together in time. That's okay though, because it's not like ghosts only work one day a year. I mean, they're not Santa, lazy ho-hoing prick. And to get into the spooky mindset, our subscribers of the day are Death Lord, Ghost King, and Garp's Fist of Love. 3 profoundly terror-inducing names there, but all of whom did the amazing thing of pressing the subscribe button for the Ground Line Review, which will result in consistent injections of One Piece culture being administered directly into their YouTube feeds. And if you want to be our next subscriber of the day, then hit the button and please do say hi in the comments below if you are a new or existing member of the Grand Fleet. Welcome. So why do I think ghosts exist in One Piece? Well, we have a series of case files to go through which present us with a series of grand phenomena. And case number 1 involves a young lady who goes by the name of Perona. Now, just like most terrifying tales that take place in a haunted castle or mansion or something along those lines, this one begins very affluently. Why is it always the mega wealthy that get haunted? Are the rest of us so poor that we simply cannot afford to be haunted? The ghost economy is tough these days. In any case, Perona does fall into the category of wealthy, given what we know of her childhood, which was lavish to say the least. She was well dressed, finely adorned with a jewel-encrusted crown, and even had a literal pet bear named Kumai. However, one day our young Perona encountered a most scaresome sight, as her pitch-black eyeballs were subject to the visage of one Gecko Moria. And for reasons that are unclear, Perona abandoned whatever her life was to become a pirate and came to see Moria as something of a father figure. I'm just gonna put this out there, it sounds an awful lot like Moria abducted a child. But at some stage, Perona gained the powers of the Horo no Mi, a fruit that single-handedly proves the case of ghosts in One Piece because it allows Perona to literally conjure ghosts. It also has a wide array of other spiritual advantages, such as giving Perona the ability to astral project, and even post-time skip, she can now somehow use it to float, thus mimicking the properties of a ghost herself. However, the problem with these ghosts is that they are not actual ghosts. They would more accurately be described as hollows because sure, they look like your stereotypical ghostly beings, and they do exist on a different plane to physical reality, but they are missing a very key characteristic. Because according to Merriam-Webster, the definition of a ghost is the soul of a dead person believed to be an inhabitant of the unseen world or appear to the living in bodily likeness. And that's problematic because Perona's ghosts are more like conjured minions. They aren't souls who were once living, they're more like artificial ghosts, so clearly fake that you can see right through them, although to be fair, you can also do that with regular ghosts as well. But having found our definition, we can now dig a layer deeper into our ghost hunt with our next file, which is Panties. Just Panties. Which I guess means that we're talking about Brook. Perona's ghost may be artificial, but Brook would be the first character in the series to prove the existence of the human soul. His devil fruit, the Yomi Yomi no Mi, allowed his soul to remain in the realm of the living after death, thus giving Brook the opportunity to return to the pile of bones which he once described as a body. In any case, Brook's ability is both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because I'm sure it gives a lot of living beings some peace of mind to know that there is indeed an afterlife, but also terrifying because it goes on to confirm that ghosts are a very real possibility. And what's even more important is that Brook is not our only case. If it was just him, you could potentially make an argument that his devil fruit grants him a soul, and that such a thing may not exist for regular old people things. But I know a very well-rounded mother who would disagree with you. Well-rounded as in shape, that is, definitely not mentally. However, Charlotte Linden's devil fruit, the Soro no Mi, gives her direct access to the souls of others, which she can then go on to do all kinds of crazy crap with, including possessing objects of these souls or soul fragments in order to craft her grand dystopian Disneyland. Although, to be fair, if you hear some of the things that come out of Disneyland, then Totterland actually sounds far more appealing. Like that time when it was revealed that Disney World cast members have to share communal underwear. It's like, it makes my junk tingle just thinking about it. Tingle in a bad way, that is. So you know what, maybe giving up part of your soul isn't so bad after all. But something you may very well have noticed so far is that all instances of ghostly activity in soul existence come directly as a result of a devil fruit. However, for us to be certain that ghosts exist in One Piece, we're going to need to see evidence of them outside of the fruit realm. And we happen to have exactly that in case file number 3, which is more Panties. No wait, actually, if we look carefully, it's a G-string. A Lao G-string to be precise, because this often forgotten about character is a supernatural extravaganza all on his own. Lao G is not a devil fruit user, although he does practice a very specific martial art known as Jioken, which focuses on collecting life energy, thus allowing him to use the power of his youth in his decrepit old age. But Lao G is also an example of Oda quite literally resurrecting a character. During his fight with Sai, Lao G quite literally died. His life apparently came to its natural end, and we saw his soul leave his body with a cute little halo thing around its head, meaning that Lao Ji, for all of the horrible things he did in life, still seems like he's going to whatever the One Piece world equivalent of heaven is. So the standards for eternal bliss are evidently quite lax in this universe. But there are a couple of very interesting things about this case. Firstly, everyone could see Lao Ji's soul, much like they can see Brookes' soul or how they can see Big Mom's soul manipulation. So even without having a devil fruit involved, the soul is at least some sort of visible entity, which is very important because to be a relatively effective ghost, you probably want to be seen in some way, shape, or form. And furthermore, in Lao Ji's case, he showed the ability to control his soul, and instead of involuntarily just flying up into the afterlife, he came back down to inhabit his body. He basically did what Brook did, just without having to eat the horrible fruit. But it goes to show that souls who hold a particularly strong purpose could very well remain in the living realm, going on to be capable of haunting others. Now, to be fair, this scene is a joke. It's actually one of my favorite jokes in the series, and we should never take something like this too seriously, or in fact, seriously at all. The reason why everyone can see Lao Ji's soul can be very easily explained by the fact that the joke just isn't funny if they can't, and it's also not funny if he can't come back to his body, so look, there is that. Meaning that we need to push our investigation even further. We now need proof that ghosts are not artificial, not devil fruit related, and also not comical in nature. That is a pretty big ask, but what do you know, we just so happen to have one. Case file number 4 logs the mysterious Cloudbaltman phenomena. So this is one of those things that comes from the real world, or at least the fantasies of the real world, as a Cloudbaltman is meant to be a kobold from German folklore that was said to assist sailors in their various sailing duties. Although the super scary thing is that there is a rather bad omen associated with the Cloudbaltman, which is that nobody ever blessed by the presence of a Cloudbaltman will ever see them. And in fact, the only time a Cloudbaltman ever becomes visible is when the ship itself is doomed. And looking back on One Piece, that's pretty much exactly what happened. In chapter 254, Usopp laid eyes on a humanoid figure fixing the Going Merry, and to everyone who was familiar with Germanic folklore, I'm sure they would have known right then and there that the Going Merry was in for a bit of a bad time. However, this being would not be confirmed until chapter 351, when Frankie explained what a Cloudbaltman was. However, in Frankie's words, Cloudbaltman is described as a single being rather than being part of an extended race or entities. With that said, Cloudbaltman seems to be intrinsically linked with the Going Merry, particularly with Merry's final words, which were, "Thank you for caring about me." Now, I guess you can make an argument that Merry's voice and the Cloudbaltman are perhaps two different entities, but it gets really convoluted and kind of redundant. The most likely scenario is that this Cloudbaltman was the spiritual and somewhat physical manifestation of the inner life of the Going Merry, which makes things complicated in its own way because not only do we now have ghosts of the living, but also ghosts of inanimate objects. For anime watchers, a Cloudbaltman did also make an appearance in the episode of Merry. It's not really known exactly what it is, whether it's the same one as the Going Merry, or whether it's Sunny's specific Cloudbaltman. All that really matters is that it doesn't matter, because the episode of Merry is not canon. However, we do know that it is possible for Sunny to have a Cloudbaltman at the very least. Speaking of though, this is not the only time that the anime has implied supernatural events that the manga has not, because we also have a wonderful series of anime-only ghosts. Going into this video, many of you may have thought to cast your minds back to the Arlong arc, and specifically to one beautiful scene where Nami is saying goodbye to her childhood home, and what seems to be the spirit of Belmere appears to see her off. And even without the spirit, this is a really nice scene because it takes the time to give Nami some closure to her entire life up until this point, whereas the manga very speedily brought her aboard the Going Merry. As sweet as it is though, this Belmere ghost never actually happened. And even if it did, you could probably interpret this as Nami conjuring a mental image in order to say goodbye. Meanwhile, there's also this like super depressing episode during the Return to Water 7 filler arc where we do see a literal stereotypical ghost of a Yagura bull. Episode 317 follows a young girl searching for her very old Yagura bull named Albire, who went missing during Aqua Laguna. But as it turns out, Albire, well, he just up and died during Aqua Laguna. And then eventually Luffy, Chopper, and the girl find Albire's spiritual apparition where he says goodbye and everything. It's very magical and ghostly. But after that, they also find a baby Yagura bull who happens to look exactly like a young Albire. So there's a potential reincarnation angle here as well. Kind of similar to the Warship Island filler. Morbid as crap. I mean, why is pet death always such a popular filler topic? Especially from a company whose mascot is a delightful kitty cat. There's something really dark going on at Toei Animation. But as ghost confirming as this would definitely be, it is all filler. However, I should say that this kind of ghost isn't isn't exactly out of the question in One Piece. We know for a fact that souls exist, and we know that these souls have the potential agency to do whatever they please. And not only that, but spirits can be conjured from the most unlikely of places as well, such as a happy lamb boat. It's not something that we can logically explain because it is fiction, but there is a supernatural layer to the One Piece world. One that we've really only begun to scratch the surface of, and in fact a layer that we may never be able to truly explore the full potential of, just like real life. We'll never know for sure whether or not ghosts exist, but my money is on no. All right, calm down. Calm. You do exist. Jeez, ghosts are super touchy. You just wait, next they're probably gonna want to vote as well. There is a hidden flamingo somewhere in this video, plotting and scheming to bring you down, and it's your job to find it before it finds you. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece. My name is Liam, and did you know that a collective noun for a group of flamingos is called a flamboyance? So of course here for you is a flamboyance of Doflamingo, because today we're here to discuss quite probably one of the most radically series-shaping decisions that has ever been made by the mind brain of Eiichiro Oda, which is that Doflamingo was originally meant to be on Wano. As an antagonist, Doflamingo was designed for this very arc and was assumedly meant to take part in the defense against the raid on Onigashima, which is pretty wow, because it would have changed, I don't know, everything. Because as we've recently examined in another flamingo-based video, Doflamingo's role and subsequent defeat on Dressrosa laid by far the most important groundwork for where we are today. So we're going to examine Oda's original intentions as well as pinpoint the point at which this change was made, because it was actually done a lot later than you may think. However, T-Perm, One Finger Man, and the Wood of Door have each done something very recently which was subscribed to the Grand Line Review, which by the way, doing so will result in consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feed. And if you want to be our next subscriber of the day, then hit the button and please do say hi in the comments below if you are a new or even old member of the Grand Fleet. Either way, welcome. But now, how do we know these things that we know? Like most of the intriguing things, this comes directly from a 6-pack of delicious info nuggets from the SBS section of the One Piece manga volumes. And in volume 98, Oda was asked by a reader if all of the Beast Pirates were named after card games. So think characters like Gin Rummy, Hold'em, and Solitaire, for example. All very obviously named after card-based shenaniganry, so Oda responded with, yep, indeed. The 3 All-Stars are pretty obvious, but all the Flying 6, the numbers, and the headliners, only excluding Drake, Apu, and Hawkins, are all named after card games, as well as the King, Queen, Jack, and 1 to 10 cards. Although I would like to point out the fact that there is no ace. I suppose Kaido himself counts as the ace card of his crew, but it's just not the same because it's just not his name. It's this guy's name, and he's dead. So I reckon that Kaido should have just slapped on a cowboy hat, adorned his chest with some red beads, and just taken the name for himself. Personal note here, I spent quite a bit of time trying to come up with some sort of pun that involved both Kaido and Ace, and I just couldn't do it. They are just completely incompatible words, so you know, no joke for you. Well, if you've got your own joke, then joke in the joke place. But Oda then went on to give away a massive detail regarding Kaido's crew. By the way, in Dressrosa, Doflamingo being called Joker is a remnant of an initial idea where Doflamingo was going to fight as a powerful companion of Kaido in the Wano country. He's quite the tricky opponent, so I'm glad we got rid of him at Dressrosa, which is pretty wow, but it does make a lot of sense. Even without being on Wano, Doflamingo being assigned the Joker alias does fit quite nicely because he and Kaido are the bestest of business pals, and I'm sure that they both share a good laugh, a bit of warororo here and a bit of there. Plus it gives us some great insight into how One Piece was originally meant to be significantly more compressed. Oda originally planned for this story to be about facing off against the 4 emperors from the get-go, but these pesky warlords sprung into existence and significantly elongated One Piece. Kind of like that guy at the pub who just when everyone else is ready to go home, presents the table with a brand new round. And then everyone needs to stay another 20 minutes to be polite, you know. But in this case, another warlord appeared, tempting Oda with another round. Then a second, then a third, and you know what? We didn't even stop at 7 either, because technically there are 11 7 warlords of the sea, so 11 extra rounds later, we find ourselves in the glorious 25-year hangover that we call One Piece, which has of course been a wonderful experience, and I really can't imagine the series without the warlords. However, even with that in mind, Oda didn't necessarily have the warlords designed to take on such primary roles, as demonstrated with our medescent Doflamingo. But my question then becomes, when did Oda decide to back out of this plan and institute an entire saga focusing on Doflamingo? Looking back on Doflamingo is a fascinating experience, because you can see his allegiance to Kaido in full retrospective glory. For example, in chapter 303, he rants on and on about quote-unquote it finally starting, an unstoppable wave, a new age of unmatched power, which we only now, like a billion years later, know that this is a reference to Kaido's ultimate ambition of throwing the world into a big ol' war. And this remains fairly consistent throughout Doflamingo's very few pre-time skip appearances. However, the Joker alias isn't mentioned at all pre-time skip. In fact, I believe the first time we hear the name is chapter 664, placing us smack bang in Punk Hazard, which is intriguing because that is mightily close to Dressrosa. In fact, it's directly adjacent. And Doflamingo was revealed to be Joker not too long after Joker was revealed to be. So my question is, even at this stage, was Doflamingo still being planned as a Wano antagonist? It's entirely possible because Punk Hazard, despite now being officially part of the Dressrosa saga, is all one big Wano setup. We're introduced to the samurai, the artificial devil fruits, the alliances formed to take down Kaido. There's a lot of foreshadowing surrounding dragons, and Punk Hazard is of course the origin of the numbers. So when we're looking at Punk Hazard, Oda was using this arc as something of a course change. From here, everything was very much full steam ahead to Wano, well, until it wasn't. So something pretty major happened within the production backend of One Piece during Punk Hazard, which isn't particularly surprising because Oda does make incredibly impactful decisions very much in the moment, which we've explored in another video about how much of the One Piece we know and love is just a series of improvised accidents. So it's very possible that when Law formed an alliance with Luffy, his actual target may very well have been Kaido, instead of the whole deception thing Law pulled where he told Luffy it was Kaido as but a clever ruse to bring down Doflamingo, which seems completely unthinkable with what we now know of Law's deeply connected history with Doflamingo. But as with many other things, I would propose that this may just be a happy accident. There were no plans for Law when he was first introduced, and Oda has specifically singled Law out as someone who surprised even him as an author. So what we have here is actually a collision of improvisation, because if Oda hadn't decided to create the rest of the supernovas on a whim during Sabati, then what happens when we get to this point post time skip? Well, things probably play out as originally planned. Without a character like Law to follow into an extended conflict with Doflamingo, what point is there in following him as a primary antagonist? In that sort of situation, Oda probably does save him for the Wano arc. But then, what happens to Dressrosa? Does this arc go ahead as we know it with a different antagonist at the helm? Do we skip the arc altogether and head straight to Zou from Punk Hazard? Or does it get replaced with a completely different arc on a new and weird island? I suppose the issue is that even if Doflamingo were to be removed from his narrative position here, something along the lines of Dressrosa does need to happen. Because in the same way that Punk Hazard laid down the path for Wano, Dressrosa created the road for the endgame of One Piece. For example, it saw the formation of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, a series of dude bros who are said to play major roles in the future. It was also our introduction of Fujitora, and combined with King Riku, that led to the dissolution of the Seven Warlord system. And then there's Sabo, who does Sabo things. So Dressrosa really had its eyes set on the far future of the series, building a lot of what will be extremely necessary foundation. Basically, the arc needs to happen in some way, shape, or form. It doesn't necessarily need Doflamingo or the island of Dressrosa, but it does need both an antagonist and a place to happen. However, and this might just be the blindness of retrospect, but it's very difficult to see who would have held that role. Part of what made Doflamingo the perfect choice for that particular time and place was because he was a classic One Piece villain. To this point in the New World, we'd only had new and, honestly, somewhat disappointing primary antagonists in Hody Jones, Vanderdecken, and Caesar Clown. So to go into a new arc like Dressrosa off the back of that and inventing another new antagonist would be such a risky maneuver. And instead, it was a much better move to show how much the Straw Hats have grown by stacking them up against a previously overwhelmingly powerful enemy. Although one way I could maybe see a new antagonist working is if it was one of the Emperor commanders. And this may not be a great example, but just go with it. Let's say that Jack was the overlord of Dressrosa. Wait, no, actually not Jack. Jack sucks. Someone else. Let's say that Queen was the overlord of Dressrosa, and the whole arc focused on this sort of appetizer skirmish against the forces of an Emperor of the Sea, with Luffy eventually being able to take down someone in that commander status, very much like what Whole Cake Island would go on to be with Katakuri. At the very least, the path to Wano would make some sense. You'd have Punk Hazard planting the seed of a conflict with Kaido, then you beat one of his commanders on Dressrosa or Commander Island, whatever it may be, and then we move on to Wano for a full-scale war. Even so, it sounds kind kind of rubbish, doesn't it? I do think we got the best possible outcome with Doflamingo in this position, and Oda did such a great job with him that there is really no one who could replace him. But the other major curiosity I do have is that if Doflamingo were on Wano, then what would his role be? Because at this point it would be pretty safe to assume that he isn't being reserved for Luffy. Luffy has much bigger, uglier, and clubbier problems to deal with. And I hate to say it, but if this original idea was implemented, then Doflamingo would probably fade into the background of this raid quite a bit. It's definitely possible that his role as the Joker of the crew would give him equitable status to the kings, the queens, and the jacks. But then again, he may also end up being more like a Scratchman-Apu style character, a well-known name who is there, but really hasn't had a lot of involvement in Wano as a whole. And in terms of the raid itself, that means that Doflamingo is liable to be beaten by a lesser protagonist. Although one great option here may actually be to have him stack up against Law. That would be a very interesting option, and maybe their flashback could play out in a more condensed format, but we have other options as well. Weirdly enough, Jinbe may also have been an appropriate choice due to their shared history as warlords of the sea, as well as standing on opposite sides of the Paramount War. But it just wouldn't have been great, you know? There is so much going on in the Wano arc that we barely have the time to flesh out the island-specific characters, let alone any extras like Doflamingo would have been. Once again, I'll bring up the Scratchman-Apu example, and we'll even add Basil Hawkins into the mix. They are carryover antagonists into the Wano arc. They don't have a lot of core personal involvement in the heart of the drama to do with the Kozuki family and all of that sort of stuff, so most of the time they're just kind of there for the sake of being there. And sadly, that more than likely would have been the same role that Doflamingo occupied. A carryover villain who was there to add some firepower to an Emperor of the Sea, and it would have been such a monumental waste of his larger-than-life character. Because when it comes down to it, Doflamingo is not just one of the better villains in One Piece, he's one of the better characters, period. During and since Dressrosa, he has consistently ranked in the top 20 of officially conducted character polls, with the only two villains capable of unseating his sheer dominance being Crocodile and Katakuri, both of whom are exceptional gems in their own right. So as amazing as it may have been to have a Doflamingo on Wano here with us right here and now, I do think that Impel Down is pretty much exactly where he belongs. One Piece is not one piece. It is in fact many pieces, fragmented, scattered across a wide array of mediums, which rather sadly means that depending on how you choose to experience One Piece, then you may be missing out on some incredibly important information. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece. My name is Liam, and I've just realized that whilst I'm your source for everything One Piece, I don't have my source for everything One Piece. So that makes me feel quite empty inside. But today we are here to enhance, enlighten, and even lengthen our experience of One Piece through the wonderful medium of cover stories. What is a cover story and why do I care, you ask? And that's a reasonable question, but just tone down the attitude. You should care because cover stories aren't just fun and games, although they are certainly full of both fun and games in equal measure. But for example, if you're an anime-only watcher, do you remember that time that Jinbe found a poneglyph? Or perhaps that time that Shanks went to a wedding? Or maybe, just maybe, that one time where it was ever so casually revealed that Bon Clay is in fact alive. Probably not, because they were never animated and possibly never will be. Which is a shame because they form a very integral aspect of One Piece, just like you form an integral aspect of subscribing to the Grand Line Review, and the doing of which will result in consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feed. And I'll tell you what, in exchange for subscribing, I will now tell you a story. Long ago in a place that didn't exist, an angel fell from the sky. The angel landed in a hole, but he was saved by a husky old man. The two then exchanged dreams. The old man wanted to build a hot springs resort, but the angel wanted to be the boss of the entire Blue Sea. That angel's name was Sky Boss Geratsu. And the fact that he was Geratsu made things immediately problematic, because Geratsu was a very special angel, one who did not understand the basic laws of life, such as standing on the ground, eating with your mouth, and even breathing with your breathing holes. That's right, Geratsu forgot how to breathe. After a cacophony of accidents, Sky Boss Geratsu disturbed the legendary forest boss as well as the dirt boss, aka a mandrill and a giant mole. But Geratsu punched them and became the boss's boss. Together with the dirt that boss, Gedatsu tunneled undersea, emerging on the desert island of Alabasta, where it is shockingly revealed that the husky old man was in fact Koza's uncle, if you remember who Koza is. And if you don't, well, he was important that one time. Upon returning home, they discovered that the forest boss had constructed an entire resort, and thus the royalty of Alabasta were invited to enjoy the newly opened hot springs. Nefertari Vivi, Kung Fu Dugong, Igaram, and female Igaram, all of the big names were there. And it would be at this point that the great Gedatsu took a moment of introspection, as he discovered that he had, entirely accidentally mind you, become the co-owner of a hot springs resort. The boss, if you will, and thus concludes the tale of how the great Gedatsu became a boss of the Blue Sea. What an inspiring story. So that was an example of a cover story, a special narrative told one image at a time, in this case over 32 installments, all of which played out entirely on chapter covers. Now, a cover is essentially the first page of any given manga chapter. In Japan, these are known as tobira or door pages, and they're designed to be opened by readers and have them step into the world of whatever the series it is. And this practice exists because manga is typically serialized in these big chunk magazines alongside like 20 other titles. So we need these doors as more of a technical mechanism to separate each series. And in fact, each author has their own unique method of constructing doors. However, I think it would be fair to say that Eiichiro Oda has by far the most unique of methods. Because very early on in the lifespan of One Piece, Oda saw this free real estate, and like a greedy property developer, he decided to pack it with stuff. Except instead of a 22-story apartment block, Oda removed both the apartment and the block, leaving us with just pure story. And that's how One Piece cover stories like the one you just heard were born. And they are legitimately one of my favorite things about this series as a whole. Because while Luffy and the Luffy crew are doing all sorts of wacky pirate stuff, we get to see what other characters are doing at the exact same time. And in most series you would just say, well yeah, who cares what all the blubberdubbers are doing? But because every One Piece character tends to feel like an actual living being rather than a nicely drawn set piece, we do tend to care about even the tertiary characters quite a bit. And they give us all sorts of fun connective moments, like the Gedatsu story. There is a panel showing Gedatsu and Karoo in the same place. Two characters who may as well have been in entirely different series because their arcs are so far removed from one another. And another great example of this would be our most recent cover story featuring Capone Gang Bej. After escaping from obese mother's Cake Island, his crew ended up landing on Dressrosa and finding Chiffon's sister, Charlotte Lola. So this one cover story brings together elements from Whole Cake Island, Dressrosa, and Thriller Bark. And I just cannot explain how satisfying it is to see all of these different One Piece world elements interacting. But cover stories are also a fantastic opportunity to expand on characters and potentially even improve on what may have been very unpopular existences. And as an example of this, let's now turn to one of my personal favorite tales. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Mostly the second one though, because after being bazookaed by a certain rubber boy, our now protagonist Wapol has ended up on a strange miscellaneous island. And in order to survive, Wapol had to source nourishment for himself. "I eat a tree," said Wapol, then turning into a tree, but he was still hungry. "I eat a lamp," exclaimed Wapol, turning into a light source that really frustrated this owl in particular. "I eat a bench," roared Wapol, terrifying the townsfolk, before being promptly arrested for being a bit of a public nuisance. Upon escaping the authorities, Wapol came to the startling realization that he was no longer a king. So he entered a bout of depression, deciding to live under a bridge and sustaining himself purely on industrial garbage. But then, in his darkest moment, a miracle. As an unintended byproduct of consuming industrial waste, the Baku Baku factory within Wapol produced a series of toys. These toys attracted children from all over the town, and so Wapol opened a small toy store to make ends meet in order to continue his rather pitiful existence. But that wasn't even the true miracle. Upon taking one of Wapol's nicely shaped excretions home, a local scientist discovered that the toys had been constructed from an entirely new metal alloy. This new element was dubbed Wapo Metal, and its special properties made Wapol a millionaire overnight, leading him to build a bigger toy store, then his own corporation, and finally providing him with enough money to literally buy his own country, now known as the Black Drum Kingdom. Oh, and also he married Miss Universe, which is wow. So there you go, a proper riches to rags to riches again story. Which just goes to show that screwing up hard enough is essentially the equivalent of success, I guess. Is that the moral of the story? But this cover story is the sole reason why I love Wapol. During Drum Island, I really could not have cared less about him. He just had the wrong balance of features to be our primary antagonist. He was a bit too funny and not anywhere near enough powerful to be threatening, so I found it really hard to buy into any kind of, drama surrounding him. However, cover stories are the perfect vehicle for someone like Wapol because you can take all of the serious drama away and just focus on what he does best, which is comedy. And I would say the same thing for Buggy as well. Orangetown didn't give me the best impression of Mr. Clown-san. However, reading his adventure to get his body back, meeting Gaimon, Alvida, and just all of that stuff across a cover story converted me into a solid Buggy fan. Which brings us to an interesting idea because the Buggy cover story was actually animated. So was the Wapol story actually. They made a quick little 5-minute segment of it during the Reverie arc. But the vast majority of these tales are never put to screen. And why is that? Well, a common answer to this would be ratings. Because allegedly when the 2-episode Buggy adventure was aired, as well as the 2-episode Kobe and Hilmepo story, they were met with terrible responses from fans. Although I honestly have yet to find any data that solidly backs that idea up. From a theoretical standpoint, I suppose in the early days I could understand that though. It might feel a bit fillerish to spend 2 episodes focusing on someone like, say, Kobe, when we could be spending time with our actual main characters, the people that we like. Or at least like more than Kobe. However, in this day and age, I don't think that would be such a big deal. One Piece has gone so far beyond the simple adventures of our simple-minded rubber Chad lad. And the anime staff are very keenly aware that cover stories do exist as material to be used because every now and then you see this sneaky little reference. Like this here newspaper that Crocus is holding. On one page you can see an article about Moda and the milk that she ended up providing to the Marines, which was only possible because Ace delivered a letter to Vice Admiral Kommel during his cover story. And Moda herself, by the way, went on to make an actual appearance in the series because it was her village that was attacked by the kooky, weird peach beard. And on the other side, we see something that I'm not quite sure is newsworthy, which were Iceberg's new secretary auditions. Because once Califer turned out to be an evil death machine, well, we needed someone new to conduct day-to-day administration. And in case you're curious, and I know that you are, the candidate who ended up getting the job was this genius 10-year-old girl. And we know that from a completely separate cover story, actually, because these features aren't just a one and done. The cover stories have their own continuity, their own characters, and even their own entire arcs. They're really great because they're pretty much the one time you can experience One Piece when the world isn't completely centered around Luffy. Everyone else gets the chance to become the protagonist of their own goofy, fun pirate adventure. And on that note, I think it's time for another story. So story mode, activate! Once upon a time in an underwater paradise, Caribou was ruining everything. Having been left on Fishman Island, he was being his stupid, swampy self and was promptly ejected by Jinbe, Knight of the Sea, banished to the marine branch of G5, where Caribou was immediately scheduled to be executed by one of 3 surprisingly brutal methods. I mean, holy crap, this is One Piece. We should not be talking about burning people at the stake. However, just as Caribou's fate was decided, it was undecided because Caribou appeared to rescue his brother. Korobo being the guy with the lizard on his head, which looks like hair in the shape of a lizard, but is actually a lizard in the shape of hair. Feeling the true bonds of brotherhood, Caribou promptly abandoned Korobo and escaped on his own, only to be immediately caught in a very karmic shipwreck and washing up on a most fatesome island. Here, Caribou would be nursed back to health by a lovely old lady who even provided him with a meat pie lunchbox. However, Caribou would soon come to discover that this island was home to a deceased revolutionary hero named Gabaru, who just so happened to look like Caribou in every way. And not only this, but Gabaru was the kind old lady's grandson, and she had now mistaken Caribou for her deceased family member. At this very moment, the revolutionary forces were attacked by the beast pirates led by Scotch, and with no other choice, Caribou was forced to fight and defeat Scotch, thus taking on the mantle of the revolutionary hero and being celebrated as the second coming of Gabaru. But then, dinosaurs. Toby Roper member and all-around sneaky boy Diaz Drake appeared, easily defeating and capturing Caribou. And whilst he was being unceremoniously and embarrassingly dragged to prison, the kind old lady provided Caribou with a farewell meat pie, before it was shockingly revealed that she had known all along that Caribou was not her grandson. Then Caribou went to prison on Wano, and everyone lived happily ever after, except for Caribou, who was in prison. And that is the story of how Caribou ended up on Wano. Story mode, deactivate. And I'm just curious, did that ever confuse any anime-only watchers? Because in the anime continuity, the last time you would have seen Karibo would have been on Fishman Island, and then somehow, like a bazillion episodes later, he ended up in the Udon prison. And look, it's far from the biggest deal in the world, but this is still one of the major reasons why I recommend that people read the manga, because it just contains so much more. And given how insanely addicted we are to this One Piece drug, more will always be better than not more. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece, and today we are here with some facts, some F-A-C-T-S, that's how it's spelled, right? Facts, shocking facts, mind you. Which, if you are a veteran One Pieceophile like myself, then you may very well have come across these in your travels. However, if you are new or a casual One Piece fan, then I can quite confidently say that a lot of what we're going to explore here today is simply going to blow your mind. And in exchange for said blowage, all I ask is that you hit that funky red subscribe button for the Grand Line Review, which will also grant you regular One Piece content uploaded straight into your YouTube feed, but much more importantly, continue to build the Grand Fleet so that we can become the undisputed kings of One Piece YouTube. A very niche title indeed. Well, let's get straight into things today because we have a lot to cover, which will begin with shocking fact number 10. The supernovas were not planned. And by that, I mean that they did not exist anywhere in Oda's notes or even his mind until the very chapter in which they were introduced. That's right, Trafalgar Law, Eustace Kid, Diaz Drake, Capone Gang Beige, and the other ones were never actually intended to be part of One Piece. According to Eiichiro Oda's message in the 27th log release, he created them in a desperate rush because he was worried that the Sabaody Archipelago arc would not be interesting enough as it currently stood. And I don't know about you, but I personally find this absolutely maddening because apparently in response to this sheer desperation, the designs for 9 incredibly striking characters just came to Oda unconsciously from nowhere. Thus, I suppose proving the theory that pressure creates diamonds, or at the very least in Oda's particular case. And from here, he also didn't expect any of them to have anywhere near as big of a role as they currently do, especially Law. And so I think what we have here is an example of creative intuition at its very best. Oda felt that a singular arc might be lacking a bit of excitement, so he responded by not just providing excitement for that particular arc, but also an entire future's worth of excitement, because I don't know about you, but as we are on Wano, I really cannot picture things without the supernovas being involved. And I also think it's quite funny because it does go to show that One Piece is nowhere near as planned as people think, although there is still very extensive planning, as can be seen in shocking fact number 9. Jinbe was planned to be a crew member from the very beginning. And this is something that we only found out relatively recently actually, but longtime fans of the series might be quite familiar with this particular image. This is a conceptual sketch of the Straw Hats featuring some very familiar faces like Luffy, Zoro, Nami, and Sanji, and I suppose I'd call Brook a familiar face, but he doesn't have one. Yo-ho-ho. And as for the rest, well, they needed a bit of work. Still, what we did not see is that in this sketch, it also originally included the OG Jinbe design, which was rather sneakily erased when the sketch was released, but the full thing has now been made available for us to gaze upon and enjoy, showing us that Oda had always planned for there to be a fishman as part of the Straw Hats, right from the get-go. And you know, it took us an awfully long time to get there, but we did, which I suppose goes to show that One Piece is very much kind of like the ultimate fusion of master planning and master improvisation, the results of which we will see in a few other shocking facts. But while we have all of the Straw Hats here, it's time for shocking fact number 8 specifically, which is that the Straw Hats are currently the only crew in the series where each and every member has an assigned bounty, or at least a bounty that we know of. And I was quite surprised by this because I felt for sure that there was another small crew out there with a handful of members who each had known bounties, but nope, it's just the Straw Hats. Every other crew is either far too big to have every member recognized or too small and insignificant. Or in the case of the new Giant Warrior Pirates, both far too big and far too small and insignificant. But no, tangent averted, the Straw Hats are still the only crew in the history of One Piece as we know it where every member has a known bounty. And now that we have some money on the mind, let's go to shocking fact number 7. And this is one of my personal favorite facts, but One Piece is the 3rd highest selling comic book series of all time. It currently has a sales total of approximately 470 million, which is trumped only by Batman in second place with 484 million, and a much more further ahead Superman with 600 million. But how crazy is that? Especially because Batman and Superman have had like a 60-year head start on One Piece, given that they were created in 1939 and 1938 respectively. And at this stage, there is no doubt whatsoever that One Piece will surpass the sales of Batman. It is as good as guaranteed. Superman, look, it's a very different question, but there is potential. I guess if it was to happen, I imagine it would be towards the end of One Piece, with the release of of the final few volumes skyrocketing sales of every other volume, with people who just want to catch up or collect them all. It is still a pretty rough ask though, considering it's taken 23 years to get to 470 million, so another 130 million, well, it's a number. But I'm pretty damn happy with the idea that by the end of its life, One Piece will be at the very least the world's second best-selling comic series. Now, as for shocking fact number 6, we have something quite obscure. So most of you are probably familiar with the idea of the Panda Man, but in case you're not, he's an Easter egg character that gets sprinkled into the background and sometimes even the foreground of manga chapters and anime episodes. He also quite frequently makes his way onto the front of Japanese volume covers hidden under the dust jacket. That's not the shocking fact though, this is very well established. But did you know that the Panda Man lore goes a layer deeper? And there is another Easter egg character even more obscure and well hidden than the Panda Man, and that is Tomato Gang. Tomato Gang is a debt collector, and the reason why the Panda Man is consistently on the run, because he's had some financial troubles, and Tomato Gang is here to collect. However, it should be noted that Tomato Gang has not made a post-time skip appearance, indicating that whatever financial issue he had with Panda Man, it may very well have been solved during those 2 years. However, he did appear on the hidden cover of volume 85, so let the conspiracy theories begin. And on that train of thought, shocking fact number 5. Aliens exist in One Piece. And furthermore, even if you've seen every episode of the anime, you're probably still unaware of this fact because they were only showcased in the manga. Quite specifically during the NL's Great Space Operations cover story, which saw NL literally travel to the moon, or one moon anyway. It's been heavily hinted that there are multiple moons surrounding the One Piece world, or that the One Piece world is in and of itself a moon, but that's a discussion for another time. But on the moon, NL met two fascinating races, one of which is a series of automata with very space-like names such as Cosmo, Galaxy, and Spacey, the spaciest of the names. And it should definitely be noted that these little guys are not the aliens in question, because we did see a flashback of them traveling to the moon via balloon, as you do. But that is okay, because we also have the big giant fox space pirates who are absolutely extraterrestrial. Furthermore, it's also revealed in this cover story that NL's ancestors and likely all Sky citizens came from the moon, which, you know what, that does make Erusian alien, as well as every Skypian local, which weirdly enough includes the Shandorans, even though they chose to settle on the Blue Sea. They are still aliens, each and every one of them. And I will never, ever understand why the anime refuses to animate these stories, because this one in particular is just pure insanity. I mean, who doesn't want to follow NL to the moon to fight a series of furry aliens? Speaking of though, this cover story ended rather ominously, with NL now in charge of a legion of space cyborgs and ready to set sail for who knows. But that does very importantly explain where he was, which relates to shocking fact number 4. Every known Logia user was present at the Battle of Marineford, with the exception of NL. And I should say that this was every known Logia user at the time. So it's pretty hard to deny that Logias were the king of class back in the pre-time skip era, absurdly powerful and practically unbeatable. So it's only natural that if an event, say some sort of paramount war, were to occur, then these legends would absolutely be involved. And you wouldn't be wrong, because in fact this war was sparked by two Logia users, one of which being Portgas D. Ace, and the man who defeated him, Marshall D. Teach. Ace was then the catalyst for the war, and Teach obviously rocked up at the end, but we had our three admirals, Aokiji, Kizaru, and Sakazuki, all of which were equipped with Logia Doom. Then lower down the rankings we had Mr. Smoker, our very first Logia user in the series, and also calling in for classic One Piece we had Sir Crocodile, our very first defeated Logia user. But still, it's a pretty cool fact that once again, apart from NL who was on the moon, our entire Logia squad up until this point saw fit to assemble at the Battle of Marineford. And while we're on the topic of pre-time skip, let's sneakily transition into shocking fact number 3. Did you know that the entirety of pre-time skip One Piece, which just as a reminder is chapter 1 all the way through to chapter 597, well, did you know that all of those events took place over the course of roughly 4 months? That's right, from the moment Luffy sets sail from Fuchsia Village to the point where he begins training with Rayleigh is a mere 4 months. Potentially even less, but probably not. And we know this because a very detailed timeline of One Piece does exist, and bonus fun fact, it even includes the year that the series takes place, which pre-time skip is the year 1522 of whatever One Piece calendar is used. And essentially, Luffy begins his adventure in May of 1522, and then puts it on hold to train in August of 1522, which very much implies that, for the most part, the Straw Hats were effectively as strong in their arc introductions as they were in their late stage pre-time skip fights. Minus upgrades, of course, like Diablo Jumba, Ashura, or gears. Aha, and now that I've said the gear word, I should immediately move on to shocking fact number 2. There is an incredibly subtle significance to Gear 4th, primarily being the chapter in which it was introduced, which would be chapter 783. That number again is 783, and this is not where we see Luffy using Gear 4th for the first time, but this is when he announces it. Now this is really trippy, but when we reverse that chapter number, we end up with 387. And maybe that doesn't sound so special until you realize that this is the chapter where Luffy announced Gear 2nd for the first time. And this is just one of those things that is so insanely coincidental that I refuse to believe that it is in fact a coincidence. The history of One Piece has taught us that Oda is very, very aware of numerical patterns and designations, and while I think that no detail like this was not planned from the beginning, Oda did take it into consideration and structure things so that these chapter numbers would mirror each other perfectly. An opportunity that could really only be given to such a long-running series. And if you've ever wondered why One Piece turned into such a long-running series, then you may very well be interested in shocking fact number 1. The biggest reason for the extended serialization of One Piece is the 7 Warlords of the Sea. According to Oda's comments in the 23rd log, One Piece was originally just supposed to be a story about fighting against the 4 emperors. But then Oda came up with a cool idea to introduce a series of pirates aligned with the world government, and because he didn't like the sound of Gobukai or Nibukai being 5 and 2 warlords, he went with Shichibukai being the 7 warlords. And that singular decision has led to entire arcs and even sagas focusing exclusively on these members. For example, the whole Alabasta saga with Crocodile, Thriller Bark with Gecko Moria, and how could we forget both Punk Hazard and Dressrosa, which focused on Doflamingo? The answer is we can't forget because it lasted so long that it was burned into our brains. Those 2 arcs, known as the Dressrosa saga, took 148 chapters to complete and were told over 4 different years from 2012 to 2016. So with that in mind, yes, it's pretty easy to see how the Warlord decision practically made One Piece what it is today. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece. My name is Liam and I don't know if this is controversial, but I don't like pulp in orange juice. However, today we're here to talk about one of the greatest living legends in the series, except not because he's dead. So let's forget that whole living part and just focus on the legendary. Edward Newgate, Whitebeard, Daddy Beardman. He goes by many names, but as one of the most prolific figures in this world, there is a lot to know about him. So today we are going to go through 10 fun facts about Whitebeard that you did not know, and if you did, I don't care, because they're still going to be fun. But to commence our Whitebeard fact extravaganza, fact number 1. Did you know that Whitebeard is not actually the original Whitebeard? Many of you are probably familiar with the existence of Romance Dawn, which were 2 one-shot prototype chapters of what would eventually become One Piece. Yes, you heard me correctly. 2 became 1. But you can see all sorts of early One Piece character experiments within these, like the very obvious Luffy and Nami's plural that is. Garp makes an appearance in one of them as well, but so does our original Whitebeard. May I introduce you to Crescent Moon Galley. He is captain of the Galley Pirates and appears in version 1 of Romance Dawn, immediately distinguishable by the trademark Crescent Moon moustache, which of course would eventually evolve into the hair accessory of choice worn by Edward Newgate in One Piece. But this gets even more fascinating because Galley has made his way into One Piece itself. As a nod to Romance Dawn, Galley was included in the anime-only events of the Logtown arc, where he gets easily caught by Smoker. However, and this one is absolutely crazy, about a gazillion real-life years later, Galley also made an appearance in the One Piece manga. In chapter 902, he is seen waiting for food at Baratier, although in the anime version, they pretty severely toned down his crescent moustache. It's not even a crescent anymore, it's just 2 pokey things. But just let that sink in. The OG small-time Whitebeard. Galley walked so that Whitebeard could run. Run into some bullets, that is. Bullets fired by the Blackbeard pirates, but still. Speaking of our pungent menace, Edward Newgate and Marshall D. Teach have quite an intrinsic connection in the series, particularly because their names are actually taken from the same historical pirate Edward Teach, who of course is better known as the real-life Blackbeard. And a lot from both characters is directly inspired from the life of Teach. For example, he was designated as a privateer, which is essentially the historical equivalent of being a warlord of the sea. And on a more morbid note, Edward Teach was ultimately killed after being shot 5 times and cut 20 times, which certainly does mirror the brutal conditions under which Whitebeard would eventually succumb. And just as a reminder, that final count was being stabbed 267 times, shot by 152 bullets, and being hit by 46 cannonballs. Also, the whole lava fist to the face, that probably didn't help too much either. And as for Whitebeard's last name, this is a bit of a lesser known fact, but it was taken from the Newgate prison, a facility famed for storing capturing and executing criminals during the Golden Age of piracy, including the real-life Mr. William Kidd, whose namesake in One Piece is depicted as an angsty redhead with a metal hoarding disorder. Quite a disrespectful way to refer to Kidd, I suppose. But one kid that Whitebeard just so happened to respect, smooth transition weirdly enough, was our protagonist, Monkey D. Luffy. And I want to emphasize that gaining the respect of Beard Daddy Man is not at all an easy thing to achieve. However, the stars very much aligned for Luffy, as Ace had told Whitebeard stories about his younger brother. Furthermore, Whitebeard also very quickly made the connection that Luffy was the child who Shanks gave an arm to save. So that's also a fairly stunning endorsement of character. But even more so than that, he just has the kind of personality that appeals to Whitebeard, because Whitebeard's encountered a couple of Luffys or Luffy-ish people before. Both his old rival Goldie Roger and his former brother-in-arms Kozuki Oden held Luffy's blatant and bordering on insane tenacity, as well as general zest for life. So of course Whitebeard spotted Luffy's potential immediately and even ordered Marco to protect Luffy during the war, mind you. So I really don't think one could hope for a greater show of respect from the strongest man in the, look, I'm gonna say universe, because I'm getting really sick of saying the word world. And how did Luffy repay this respect? Well, he told Whitebeard to, quote, shut up, and that he was going to be the Pirate King instead of Whitebeard. And whilst most people would probably receive an earthquake to the face, Whitebeard had a more intriguing plan in mind to pay Luffy back for this. However, that plan was only enacted in the anime because fun fact number 4 is, it's kind of weird, and it's because in the anime, for reasons, Whitebeard appears to use Gear Second, thereby infringing on Luffy's intellectual property, but cleverly dying before Luffy could file a lawsuit. It was a bit of a missed opportunity as well, because he had Drakeul Mihawk Esquire lined up to take the case, but well, what can you do? Whitebeard kind of outplayed him on this one. In all seriousness though, or I guess at least some seriousness, I can't promise all, let's forget I said that, but the anime did a weird thing here. In episode 485, Whitebeard goes full steamed hams, mimicking Luffy's Gear Second effect in a fit of rage, and I can only imagine that's why it was done, to convey the sense of, oh damn, that old man, he's angry kind of atmosphere. It's just very interesting that to do so, they chose to use that very specific effect. Anyway, dogs. Fun fact 5th is that Whitebeard was a proud dog owner in his day. As in the SBS of volume 58, Oda revealed that Whitebeard had a dog named Stefan, a dog who came equipped with his own crescent moustache. Now, Stefan was actually created as a result of a reader asking the question of whether or not Whitebeard ever uses his moustache as a boomerang. And of course, Oda answered yes, but probably only when he takes his dog for a walk, and then he drew a doggo. And so Stefan now has an official entry on the One Piece wiki, and I have to read his history section word for word because it's pretty amazing. Sometime in the past, Whitebeard took Stefan for a walk. During their walk, Stefan and Whitebeard played catch with the pirate's mustache. And that is it. That's all we know about Stefan's history. However, knowing absolutely nothing about a character before has never stopped a fanbase from appreciating them, as a stunning slew of Stefan fan art now exists on this planet, all of which is phenomenal, and we just need more Stefan fan art in this world. I cannot emphasize that enough. All right, it's time to give away a boat. And yes, before you all get up in my crap, I do know there's a difference between a boat and a ship. I like the word boat more, so sometimes I say it. Next on to fun fact, whatever number it is, 6 I think it is, which is embarrassing because this fact is actually all about numbers. As with many prominent characters in this pirate-infested comic, Whitebeard has a very special set of numbers, being 4 and 6, which thanks to the magic of Gorowase, or Japanese number play, they can be said as Shiro. And I think that any of you who have done first-year Japanese studies of any kind will know that Shiro means white. These numbers can be found in Whitebeard's birthday, which is the 6th of April, a date that would be read as 4-6 in Japanese. And I suppose American as well, because you guys go what, month, day, year, which I personally find weird and unpleasant. It should be either year, month, day, or day, month, year, end of discussion. Meanwhile, Whitebeard's bounty also contains his most special numbers, as it is 5,046,000,000 berries. So another 4 and a 6 and another Shiro to add to the white pile. With Shiro in mind, it shouldn't surprise you to discover that Whitebeard's name in Japanese is actually Shirohige, which is very interesting because for as long as I've been a part of this here fan base, one of the most common jokes and or legitimate questions is the idea that Edward Newgate calls himself Whitebeard, despite the fact that he is clearly lacking in the beard department. Impressive moustache, yes, no doubt, but the rest of his face is as bare as a newborn baby's backside. So what's with the beard business, you ask? Well, just like the inconsistent nature of the I before E rule, this is is an English exclusive problem. With Whitebeard's name, it's the hige part that we translate as beard. However, in Japanese, hige is a very vague word that can refer to any kind of facial hair. So take our good friend Baron Tamago here. His face, look at it, it is chock full of hige. And it would make complete sense for Oda to have named him something like Tamago Hige, which we would then translate in English as Eggbeard. Alternatively, if you look at it from a Japanese perspective, then our real-life historical pirates, like, say, Blackbeard, well, their names directly translated into Japanese would be Black Face Hair, which all of a sudden makes them sound a lot less fearsome and a lot more like a sort of unfortunate drug side effect. To bring things back to Whitebeard though, Galley from Romance Dawn was not the only inspiration for the character. In fact, Whitebeard's personality is modeled after someone who Eiichiro Oda actually knew. No pictures of this man have ever been made public, but Whitebeard's persona was apparently modeled after the barkeeper of a pub, which Oda used to frequent with his editor. The barkeeper sadly passed away in 2007, which probably made drawing Whitebeard's inevitable death that much more emotional for Oda, because the character himself would follow suit in early 2010. But by that time, Whitebeard had made a significant impact not only on One Piece, but manga in general. So much so that the legacy of this fictional character is actually marked by Universal Studios Japan, who erected replicas of the graves for both Whitebeard and Ace as part of their park attractions. And on this monument, Whitebeard's epitaph is as follows: Edward Newgate, Captain of the Whitebeard Pirates. Here lies a great captain and father, liberated from the exhausting role and labor, who captained the Moby Dick in the spectacular era of pirates. Which somberly transitions us into fun fact number 10, which is that for all of the high bounties, the infamous reputation, and being crowned as the strongest man in the world, Whitebeard's primary achievement tends to go unnoticed, which is simply that he is the most humble pirate to have ever existed. Aside from Shanks, he is the only emperor to have never shown any interest in the idea of becoming the pirate king or taking over the world or any number of those sort of selfish, vanity, chaos-causing projects. Whitebeard began his sailing career to provide for his village, and he continued it to provide for his sons. Not one action in this world was ever taken for the sake of himself, and I think it's incredible that this unique drive actually led him to standing on top of the world. And even then, with the title of the planet's ultimate strong guy, Whitebeard's mindset was still absurdly humble, which to me is epitomized in his words in chapter 563. I am only one man with one heart. Call me a demon, call me a monster, but I can't be the strongest forever. However, I must protest because Daddy Beardman, you will always be the strongest in our hearts. What if I told you that in 1996, 1 year before One Piece began publication, that author Eiichiro Oda was walking down a road in his country hometown of Kumamoto when suddenly he caught sight of a farmer in a state of undress, wearing nothing but a straw hat and proudly claiming that he would become the king of Kumamoto. And later that night, Oda would use this inspiration to draw the very first sketch of a character who would become known as the infamous Monkey D. Luffy. I mean, obviously if I told you that, I'd be lying, but in the end, that's kind of what myths are, just glorified, well-told lies. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, a source for everything One Piece, and today we are here as truth seekers. It is going to be our task, nay, our duty, to examine some of the most enduring myths in One Piece and to ideally shatter them before your very eyes in order to reveal the cold, hard, and sometimes even stranger truth behind them. Because to be frank, here is a shocking statistic. Apparently, One Piece has been in publication longer than about 45% of my audience have actually been alive. So there's that. And during that time, whilst you were all evolving from embryos to messy teenagers and ultimately into semi-functional adults, One Piece has been subject to staggering amounts of misinformation that then became urban legends that became fan canon, and fan canon that has now passed into the realm of myth. And to begin our exploration, we are going to have a quick round of myth or fact, a very simple minigame, the rules of which are as follows. I am going to present you with a common One Piece fan statement, and it is going to be your job to guess whether it is a myth, aka untrue, or whether it is a fact, aka a fact. Now, should you guess incorrectly, then your splendid punishment will be subscribing to the Grand Line Review, which will also result in regular One Piece content being uploaded straight into your YouTube feed. And if you are correct, then well, aren't you clever? But here is today's statement. Zoro has been canonically referred to as the first mate of the Straw Hat Pirates. Is this a myth, or is this a fact? I'll give you some time to decide, and we shall reveal the answer in 3, 2, 1, and bam, it is actually actually, surprisingly enough, a fact. Zoro has been referred to as the first mate on not one but two separate occasions, once by Mad Monk Rouge on Sabari and once by Bartolomeo on Dressrosa. So for everyone who selected Myth, you know the thing to do, and please do say hi in the comments below if you are a new member of the Grand Fleet. Welcome. But that is as good a place to any to start, because despite the fact that it was a fact, the idea that Zoro is the first mate of the Straw Hat Pirates is still actually a myth. I know that sentence I said was just very confusing, but just stick with me for a second. It is a very popular myth that makes a lot of sense within the context of the series. So popular, in fact, that as you can see, canon characters have actually started running with this myth. In fact, if you take a closer look at Bartolomeo's statement, he quite blatantly says that Zoro is considered by him to be the right-hand man and the first mate of the crew. And I always found this pretty funny because Bartolomeo is meant to be a character who embodies the One Piece fandom just inserted into the series, so it's a pretty perfect statement. However, in reality, well, the reality of this fake comic world, in reality, the Straw Hats do not have a vice captain or a first mate role. I mean, yeah, you could say that Zoro fulfills the purpose of that role, I suppose, but here's a bonus fun fact. Originally, Usopp was going to be the official vice captain of the crew, which was revealed along with some original concept art in One Piece Green. Much more importantly though, Usopp was also meant to have this funky pirate hat, which he never got, and I personally feel quite robbed on his behalf. Moving on though, we have another Zoro related myth, except this time it has to do with his childhood friend Kuina, who tragically passed away. But if you look at this topic anywhere on the internet, you will usually find a claim that says something along the lines of, Kuina did not die by falling down the stairs. This is a Japanese euphemism for committing suicide. Which, if that was true, would be super dark. However, it is not. It is a definite myth. I have never been able to find anything whatsoever that substantiates this idea of an alleged euphemism in Japanese culture, and if you have more information regarding it, then yeah, please do let me know in the comments, but at this point, I don't think it exists. I suspect that this is more a case of a fan theory turned fan canon turned myth. Mostly in an attempt to reconcile what I will admit is a bit of a weird situation. I mean, compared to every other flashback in the series, this death seems odd, very odd, and quite out of place, but at the same time, that is exactly sort of what it was meant to convey. The sheer fragility of humans, and while it doesn't seem very One Piece in retrospect, that's what we've got to deal with. Moving on to someone who once visited Zoro's village, actually, here's one that is well and truly solidified in fan canon, that being the idea that Monkey D. Dragon has the highest bounty in all of One Piece, which I suppose would be easy to tell if we knew what it was, but we don't. So this situation, look, it's not strictly speaking a myth, but it's definitely not confirmed either. However, many people, including myself in the past, have taken it as confirmed due to Dragon's epithet, which is often cited as the most wanted man in the world. And if you are the most wanted, then logic would dictate that you probably have the highest bounty on your head, at least amongst your living contemporaries. And if that were the case, then I would agree, but it isn't, so I can't. Depending on your translation of choice, Dragon's official epithet is either the world's worst criminal or the world's most heinous criminal. And whilst this may seem a bit like splitting hairs in the grand scheme of things, neither of those come anywhere near close to saying that he is the most wanted. So look, I'm not going to say that Dragon definitely doesn't have the highest bounty, but I do want you to question that far too commonly accepted idea that he definitely does, because that thought is based entirely on some kind of fan translation that decided to arbitrarily label him as the most wanted man in the world, and that's kind of that. In any case, let's skip forward in time to a relatively recently generated myth, which is that one Charlotte Katakuri is a Logia-type devil fruit user. I cannot accurately quantify how many times I see this statement in my YouTube comments section. It's one of the most frustrating things to read. Whenever I mention he's a Paramecia user, I'm always met with this bombardment of comments going, "No, Crown Line Review, you don't know what you're talking about. He is a Logia." However, in all fairness to those commenters, that did used to be true. This is one of those confusing situations where the truth is quite difficult to discern unless you happen to be there at the time. By which I mean reading the series weekly when chapter 863, where our Lord and Savior, Fish Jinbe, identified the Mochi Mochi no Mi as a Logia-type devil fruit. Yes, those were the words he said. However, when this chapter was compiled into volume 86, a very curious change was made, where Jinbe now states that Katakuri is a special Paramecia, quite different. And there's a whole ton of speculation as to why that change was made. However, this original Logia labeling is still persistent in the fanbase to this very day. And you know, it also doesn't help that Katakuri is capable of completely mimicking his Logia powers through future sight and such. That and, let's be honest, he was 100% originally meant to be a Logia user. But he isn't. He's a very special boy, and thus this whole Logia business is but a myth. Onwards to some filler fun now, because I get asked this question a lot on YouTube, but may I now present to you the myth of the second poneglyph on Alabaster. Now manga readers will be well aware of this by default, but this may come as a surprise to many anime viewers who remember that in episode 102, the Straw Hats just casually found a poneglyph lying about in the desert. And in fact, this was the very first poneglyph to have actually been shown in the anime, so in retrospect it carries some pretty incredible significance, especially once you learn what their actual purpose is. But in terms of series canon, this poneglyph does not actually exist. This was anime original content, aka filler, where the Toei production team took some pretty massive liberties, which has resulted in this ongoing myth that the Straw Hats will have to one day travel back to Alabaster in order to read this poneglyph. But they don't, because doesn't exist. And there is another very popular myth that has the Straw Hats inevitably traveling back to Alabaster as well, which is the idea that the ancient weapon Pluton is hidden on the island. Now I do need to apologize for this because I was also very guilty of spreading this myth in my early days, which resulted from a process that I would describe as sheer brain failure. But basically when Nico Robin reads the actual poneglyph on Alabaster, it details where the ancient weapon Pluton is. And later on in a flashback, King Cobra states that if Robin had actually given Crocodile that information, then the kingdom of Alabaster would have fallen into his hands, which I suppose is very maybe implying that Pluton is hidden on the desert nation. But that's all we really have, so this one gets hit with a very solid unconfirmed. And it's problematic because we do have precedent elsewhere to examine, which is the poneglyph on Skypiea, known to contain the location of another ancient weapon being Poseidon, which was far, far away on Fishman Island. So Pluton may not necessarily be on Alabaster. Because in a way, it's kind of like giving someone a map and then telling them they don't need the map because they're already where they need to be. So I guess we'll have to leave this one up to time to determine, but right now Pluton on Alabaster is very unconfirmed. In keeping with the Robin theme though, let's step back a couple of decades to the O'Hara incident, and a myth that spawned from that being the idea that Robin's mentor figure, Jaguar D Sol, is indeed alive. And sadly, I do need to break it to you that he is less than alive. One might even say dead. Now this might be a slightly controversial statement because talking about death in One Piece always is, and this is another instant where theories have infested our brain things, whispering sweet nothings such as, Sol is alive, he's in Impel Down, Guzan only froze him. But no, along with the rest of O'Hara, Sol just blew up, dying with a smile on his face like all members of this D-clan business. However, once again, this is controversial, so much so that even the fine scholars of the One Piece wiki could not come to an agreement, resulting in a bit of an online academic spat. Basically, it began with a user named Justin who decided to pose the question of whether or not Sol was actually dead, citing evidence both for and against. And at this stage, another user named Joe Kiddo did not take kindly to this and decided to respond with, "Oh come on Justin, Sol is dead and that's the fact, so please stop trying to be full of yourself and leave Sol in the dead category, okay? Peace out, man." Which prompted Justin to reply with, "You're talking to me about being full of himself? Joe, you're the one who said flat out that we should all just shut up and let you run the wiki and do whatever you like. I don't think you have much room to talk on this particular matter." Snap Justin. Snap, so I guess that's a score 1 for Justin there, but really in the end it is a score none, because both of you are arguing about a fictional giant with a cowboy hat on the internet. But now we come to my favorite myth. And when I say favorite, I mean it's the one I'm the most sick of hearing about, which is that allegedly Eiichiro Oda once stated that if a human were to eat the Hito Hito no Mi, which is Chopper's devil fruit, then they would be granted enlightenment. This comes out without fail and en masse every time this fruit is mentioned in any video, and it is a myth. It is 100% pure myth. And the origin of said myth is the SBS of volume 20, where the following question is posed: what happens if a person eats the Hito Hito no Mi? To which Oda replies with, "I suppose I should say they become human." I guess you could say that means like becoming an adult or finding your true spirit or something. So basically people will live more human-like. Well, I guess you could say that, or not. Basically, not. Goodbye, runs away. In effect telling us that Oda was completely talking out of his ass before, promptly denying his ramblings and then running away as best one can in words on a page and not literally doing it. And as far as I can tell, the only reason for this enlightenment myth has to stem from a very poor fan translation of this segment. But seriously, I have never encountered a myth with as much staying power as this one, with such an overwhelming amount of people just believing it at face value because some dude bruh on an internet forum said so. Although, to be completely fair, I am also some dude bruh on the internet, giving you an online translation from the One Piece wiki, and well, look, by now we know how Justin and Joe can be. So let us instead decide by opening our Bibles to One Piece Volume 20, Chapter just after 184, page number not listed. What would happen if a human ate the human fruit? There's a saying we have in Japan, to become human, or rather to come of age. It means to act like an adult or to stop acting crazy, to behave the way a human being is supposed to. Maybe that's part of it, or not. Well, no, yes, that's what I mean. Runs away. He runs away on page again. Now, some key words that you did not hear in this passage include enlightenment, wisdom, knowledge, insight, refinement, and enlightenment again, because this concept never even comes close to being mentioned. So the next time you encounter someone who spouts something along the lines of the Hito no Mi will grant a human enlightenment, well, you can look them dead in the eye and you can tell them, no.